and the Valley. City News Time, 9 o'clock.
Number one for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, June 21st. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, 14 degrees, and here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. It looks like we have a bit of an explanation as to why the Doors, for example, were giving the trains on Confederation Line such a hard time just after launch. Here's City News reporter Chris Curries.
The LRT is a complicated piece of engineering, from rails to tunnels to trains to technology, and it all has to work together seamlessly. Problem was that Alstom built the trains and Thales Canada built the computer technology, and OLRT Constructors, which is part of Rideau Transit Group, had to merge the two together, and it was not a flawless execution. For example, a passenger once got caught in the door, and you would expect it to sense that and reopen, similar to an elevator, but this time it stayed closed. The reason? In the software, a different command was assigned to that task. Michael Burns of Thales also testified yesterday that they didn't get adequate time to test their system on the trains, and that even though it's been used on similar trains, these Alstom ones were specifically designed for Ottawa. Chris Curries, City News.
Now, extra cash is also needed for Phase 2 of LRT. Work on things like gas and waterworks, as well as power and telecommunications. It means the city will have to add another $60 million to the budget. A report to council from the transit GM, Renee Emelkar, says even more cash could be needed for the portion of construction, and an updated financial picture is going to be delivered to council next year. This must go through Finance and Economic Development Committee, or FEDCO, later this month, then be sent to council for final approval. City News Time, 9:02. Now your forecast. Here's meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Below average temperatures for the start of summer for Ottawa, the Valley, Smiths Falls. Today there will be some wet weather at times today and tonight. 20 degrees for the high. That's it. The average high is closer to about 25, 15 for the low, and a chance of some thunderstorms tonight. For today, the high, 20.
And right now in both Ottawa and Smiths Falls, 14 degrees. City Folk Festival is back and tickets on sale 1 hour from now. The music festival back at the Great Lawn at Lansdowne for a pair of 3-day weekends in September. Executive Director Mark Monahan shares some of the lineup.
We've got a wide variety of artists, which includes people like John Fogerty, Orville Peck, Black Pumas, Glorious Sons, Tim Hicks, and Zach Bryan.
Now, Monahan tells City News the outdoor atmosphere should bring out a great crowd with a great vibe. As mentioned, pre-sale tickets go on sale at 10 o'clock this morning, and we'll have more with Mark Monahan as well coming up on the Sam LaPrade Show this afternoon on City News. A Nobel Peace Prize was sold at auction in New York last night. It raised a staggering amount of cash for Ukrainian charity.
The Nobel Peace Prize, auctioned off by Russian journalist Dmitry Muratov to raise money for Ukrainian child refugees, sold Monday night for $103.5 million, shattering the old record for a Nobel. No word on who bought it. Muratov said in an interview after the auction, "I was hoping that there was going to be an enormous amount of solidarity, but I was not expecting this to be such a huge amount." Muratov has said the proceeds will go directly to UNICEF in its efforts to help children displaced by the war in Ukraine. Just minutes after bidding ended, UNICEF told the auction house it had already received the funds. I'm Jennifer King.
And I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Separating headlines
from hearsay.
It's the Rob Snow Show on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Good morning, Ottawa, and welcome to the Rob Snow Show. Rob is off today. Derek Fage here, host of Daytime Ottawa on Rogers TV, filling in for Rob. Oh my goodness, what a show. What a show we have for you. I sent David a note, like a text, literally 5 minutes ago, and said, I haven't been this excited about a show in quite some time, because the content on this show is A1, as usual. But there's a lot to get fired up about. And oh boy, we're going to get you fired up for the talkback hour, I'll tell you that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. I'll tell you what our question of the day is for the talkback hour. Really excited about today's guest, as we always are, but Professor Ian Lee will join us on the show. Lots to talk about with Professor Ian Lee. That's kind of a little bit of the opening rant I have for you this morning. We'll touch on some of the things we're going to talk about with Professor Ian Lee. Michael Taube, columnist with Troy Media and Looney Politics, former speechwriter for Stephen Harper, also joining us later on in the show in the 11 o'clock hour. Again, going to probably touch on a few things in my opening as well with Michael. We'll talk about the beginning of the end of Justin Trudeau with Michael. There's been a few articles recently, a couple of columns in Sunday newspapers this weekend that predict that Justin Trudeau may take his own walk after his confidence deal with the NDP expires ahead of the next election. So that's something to keep an eye on. It's something Rob and I actually talked about. I've talked about a couple of times on the show. You know, probably the best way for the Liberals to stay in power beyond this next term, because let's be honest, you know, based on recent past, governments don't age well. You know, think back to Stephen Harper's unimpressive third term, or Jean Chrétien, Liberal civil war that engulfed his final years in office, right? Could the same be happening to Justin Trudeau? And is it time? Does he need to consider stepping away? So we'll talk to Michael Taube about that a little bit later on in the show. But let's open up, because let's open up with a little rant, shall we? It's always a great way to start the day, isn't it? Isn't it? As you heard here on City News Ottawa, the federal government has announced its long-awaited details of its ban on some single-use plastics, including bags and takeout containers. Now, you probably won't be surprised to hear that restaurant and the restaurant and grocery industry, the executives within those industries, are warning that there just aren't enough replacements around. Let me read you a quote. This one just caught my attention because I found it a little humorous as well. But he said, you know, you can't put soup in a cardboard box. You can't just put fries in people's hands. That from an exasperated Olivier Bourbeau. He's the Vice President of National Affairs for Restaurants Canada. He said that shortly after the yesterday morning's announcement by Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. Guilbeault announced that companies will be banned from importing or manufacturing plastic bags and takeout containers by the end of this year, and from selling them by the end of next year, and from exporting them by the end of 2025. Now, the move will also affect single-use plastic straws, stir sticks, cutlery, and six-pack rings used to hold cans and bottles together. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. For grocers, right, particularly small chains and independents, replacing plastic bags and takeout containers is shaping up to be a logistical nightmare. I mean, larger competitors, right, they're going to snap up these, what they're saying, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, limited supplies of alternative products. A quote, by the way, from Gary Sands, Vice President of the Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers. When asked about this is I love the way government replies to these kinds of questions. When asked about concerns over their ability to source some of these products and at what cost, the federal government has suggested that grocers can pass increased costs along to their customers. Ah, yes. Excellent suggestion, considering millions of people in this country are struggling to pay for the basics. You know, independent small grocery chains, restaurants, don't worry about the extra costs. You can just pass it along to the customers that are desperately trying to put food on the table and putting a roof over their head. They'll understand, I'm sure. Smaller grocery chains and restaurant owners they're definitely going to have a hard time striking a deal with suppliers of non-plastic alternatives. Most non-plastic alternatives are more expensive. I mean, the other issue that probably should be looked at when it comes to plastics in this country is the fact that, all that on a weekly basis, you're doing your best. You're putting what belongs in the blue container and what belongs in the black container in the black container. You're throwing compost into your green bin. But let's go back to plastics for a moment, your blue bin. Plastics in this country, what gets recycled, you may ask yourself. And if you haven't done the research, we've done it for you here on the Rob Snow Show. 9% of what you put into your blue bin is recycled. 9%. 86% of that ends up in landfill. And you're like, wait a minute, Derek, that's, you got the 9, you got the 86, that's 95%. Well, what about the other 5%? Well, that's burned in incinerators, which contributes to, guess what? Air pollution. Yeah. So all your hard work, 9%. So I don't, another consideration. Perhaps we should look at how we recycle plastics a little bit better instead of shipping them off as well, right? That's another thing that we do in this country. We ship them off to other countries, developing countries, and hope they can make the best of it. Heck, we even had we had to ship some back to our own country, if you remember that story a couple of years ago. Canadians, by the way, throw away over 3 million tons of plastic every year. So, just consider 9% of that 3 million tons is getting recycled, only 9%. So the question, is it the right time to implement a ban on single-use plastics? It's definitely something that has to be implemented at some point. I think most of us would agree, but considering the rising cost of living and the fact that businesses, big and small, will most certainly pass on increased cost to their customers, perhaps a longer phase-in period would have been a better approach. I know what you're thinking. You may be thinking, Derek, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland just delivered a speech to the Empire Club in Toronto, to the elites in Toronto. Anyone belong to the Empire Club or paid a visit? I don't think I've ever met anyone that has been a part of the Empire Club. She just delivered that speech a few days ago. I think it was June 16th, outlining $8.9 billion in financial supports her government had already, by the way, introduced to help Canadians in her last budget to deal with rising inflation. It's called the new Affordability Plan. It's going to put more money in the pockets of Canadians. This is, by the way, not my words, Chrystia Freeland's words. It's going to put more money in the pockets of Canadians at a time when they need it most, which is, guess what, right now. But if you go through the new affordability plan, there doesn't seem to be a lot that's helping us right now. You can go and have a look at this, by the way. Part of it is boosting the Canada Workers' Benefit by $1.7 billion this year. By the way, you get that back during when you do your taxes. It's not necessarily helping you today. I believe you can get it in 2 installments if you are desperate for it. So yeah, this is the boosting the Canada Workers Benefit $1.7 billion this year. That is, individually workers can now receive up to $1,395 a year in benefits, while a family can qualify up to $2,400 annually. They say that those amounts are almost doubling, with a boost of $1,200 for individuals and $2,400 for families. They're going to increase old age security by 10%, providing up to $766 in new support in the first year starting in July. So that's just around the corner. I guess that'll help some of us that are on OAS. They'll be providing a one-time housing affordability payment of $500 for low-income Canadians. I'm sure all of these are very easy to access, too, if you visit the government website. It'll probably be a very short form, unlike the long-form census. Sure. Reducing the cost of childcare. We know that's incredibly expensive. They say that's going to be reduced by an average of 50% by year's end, and bringing it to an average daily cost of $10 a day by 2025 or 2026. So that's more of a long-term outlook outlook, I guess. They will be providing free dental coverage for Canadians earning less than $90,000 a year, beginning with children under 12 in 2022. So we'll have to look for that implementation. And there's a few other things in there. Now, Freeland's speech, as I mentioned, was simply a re-announcement of previous measures. If I look at most of those, I don't see how they're helping the majority of us right now. Families and individuals need direct financial support right now, not months, not years from now. And I guess because it's been brought up by the opposition, they're not going to cut the GST and carbon taxes on fuel and diesel, which would help us all right now. That would help bring down the cost of gas, which in turn would probably help bring down a number of other essentials. By the way, on Monday, when asked to reduce gas taxes in the House of Commons, Freeland said she is not ruling anything out. However, she said a cut to the gas tax would, get this, hurt government efforts to shrink the deficit. I'm sorry, I know it's not laughable, but it is to a certain extent. So after 7 years of spend, now you're going to cut back on deficit spending. Now, you're going to do that now with inflation at a 31-year high of 6.8% in April. That was the April numbers. With most economists, by the way, predicting it to be well over 7% when the May numbers get published tomorrow. That number, by the way, would be a number that we have not seen since the 1980s. So we can't cut taxes on your fuel and diesel because we need to put in efforts to shrink the deficit. I mean, I feel this is me banging my head on the microphone. My goodness. Doesn't work as well with the mic sock. Let me just say that. There we go. Oh, boy. By the way, in an article from the Globe and Mail today, we're going to talk about this a little later on with Professor Ian Lee. He's coming up at about 9:30. The headline reads, reopening Keystone Pipeline talks won't address high oil prices, Yellen says, after meeting with Freeland. Janet Yellen, by the way, is the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who, along with Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, have pledged to help central banks tackle inflation by, guess what? Cutting back on deficit spending. So the U.S. has decided to do the same thing. Ms. Yellen saying also she's cool to reopening Keystone Pipeline talks as a way to reduce oil prices. And regardless of how you feel about pipelines, okay, many of you listening right now might not like the idea. I get it. But it doesn't seem logical that there would be no effect on oil prices if the Keystone Pipeline was in place. You have to admit that. So my plea is, can somebody in the Liberal Party, please, step into the reality that the rest of us are living in? Do something now. Help Canadians afford their basics by reducing taxes at the pumps, the grocery store, the pharmacy, the corner store. I don't care what. Why does it feel like Canadians suddenly have to beg for help after 7 years of historic spending and historic debt? All right, I've already gone over time here. There's your setup, though, for the Talkback Hour. Is the government doing enough about inflation? Do you feel like they care about your cost of living? That's our question for today's Talkback Hour. You can give us a call after the 10 o'clock news at 613-750-1310. That's 613-750-1310. Coming up after the break, City Councillor Keith Egley joining us on the show. We got lots to talk about with him. I'm Derek Fage, filling in here on the Rob Snow Show. You are watching on Rogers TV and listening on City News.
Riding requires attention and focus. No distractions, no moment of unawareness, because one brief moment can cost a lifetime of other moments. Everyone deserves to arrive home.
The Maritime provinces are home to some of the oldest settlements in Canadian history. But did you know that one of the first was actually started by black settlers? Take a minute to learn about the rise and untimely fall of Africville. Black people have lived in Nova Scotia since before the founding of Halifax in 1749, but it wasn't until after the American Revolution in the late 1700s and early 1800s that large groups of Black settlers began to arrive in the province, many of whom were former slaves promised freedom and land in Nova Scotia. What they encountered when they arrived, however, was racist treatment by their white neighbors and government officials. This pushed many Black people to build homes on the outskirts of town instead. But despite the area receiving little support from government officials and lacking necessities like functioning sewage systems, access to clean water, and proper garbage disposals, the tight-knit community persevered, and so Africville was born. For more than 150 years, the small community grew, expanding from just a few homes to a population of over 400 people. Everything changed, however, in 1964 when plans for a new bridge and the idea of urban renewal prompted the municipality to set its sights on Africville's land. Instead of investing in the community, officials approved a relocation program that promised free job training and employment assistance to help residents through relocation. But the reality wasn't so kind. Residents had their belongings moved in city dump trucks and homes were demolished immediately after their owners left. Of the 400-plus people living in Africville, only 14 residents held clear legal titles to their land, so the rest were only given $500 with the promise of more social aid in the future. Not much else was actually done to support Africville and its residents until 2001, when a United Nations report called for reparations to be paid to the community. In 2010, Halifax Mayor Peter Kelly apologized for the atrocities against Africville as part of a $4.5 million compensation deal. In 2021, Councillor Lindell Smith put forward a 7-part motion to plan for the future of Africville alongside local organizations and the descendants of former residents. Today, there's a public park and museum where Africville once stood to teach visitors about the history of the land and its community. If you've never heard of Africville, you're not alone. The tragic story of this small Black community in Nova Scotia is not as well known as it should be.
He's the opinionated Ottawa icon.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Well, welcome back to the show. I am not that Ottawa icon. Rob Snow is off today. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV, filling in for Rob. As I mentioned, great show. We kick off the show with City Councillor for Knoxdale-Marival Ward and Chair of the Ottawa Board of Health, Keith Egley. Keith, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Derek. You're that other Ottawa icon.
Thanks for saying so, Keith. Thanks for saying so. I appreciate that. Lots to talk about. I mean, the Board of Health has received the report on OPH pandemic spending. Let's talk first of all about the response, Keith, from, around the table with your colleagues or even, listening to your constituents here in the region. What have you heard about the response in itself as far as the municipality goes?
Well, generally it's been quite positive. We actually had a preliminary report last night at the board meeting as well by an independent public health assessor as to, how the response has gone thus far. Okay. We'll get a more detailed response in the fall, but the initial reaction was from this independent review that the public health and the city had been quite nimble in their approach and flexible in being able to get to the communities and the residents if they needed to. So generally speaking, the feedback both from residents that we're serving and an independent review has been that under the circumstances, and it was brand new for everybody, but that public health did quite well in meeting the needs of the community.
What about costs, Keith? When we look at the costs of the pandemic last year, how much did the pandemic cost?
Well, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but
okay.
You can well imagine it was millions and millions of dollars. The good thing, though, that's happened with the previous provincial government and a very similar government just reelected is they have been very supportive on the cost front, basically saying to public health when things got really difficult and a lot of resources had to be thrown at the COVID virus, keep track of what you're spending, let us know, we'll make you whole. will cover off those costs, and they've done that. We on May the 2nd they gave some one-time funding to cover the costs thus far this year, but they also made it clear that there'd be an opportunity later in the year to readjust those numbers. If because we just never really know what's going to happen with COVID. Right now, one of the other things we talked about last night, Derek, is that we are starting to see the wastewater numbers go up again. We're starting to see some more outbreaks. So again, we're looking like we're trending upwards, unfortunately, and so these are things that we're going to have to respond to, get more people vaccinated, make that available, and. But we've had a great provincial partner in that regard. They've been very supportive on the financial side of things, helping support any shortfalls that have come up, because as you can well imagine, with a moving target like this, it's difficult to get your budget bang on.
Right. We're speaking, by the way, to City Councillor Keith Eglai. Keith, obviously then ongoing funds are needed, right, for pandemic costs, because as you just said, when the wastewater numbers are going up, we have seen some outbreaks. Is that within the budget? And I know it's sort of, as you just described it, a moving target, but where's that money coming from? Have we set aside funds here in the city?
So again, we're working in partnership with the province. The province, as I said, gave what they called one-time funding, but at the same time saying in May that these numbers are subject to change. If you need to respond further and more aggressively to COVID in the community, we're there for you. And that's been our experience since the beginning of this, Derek, that when we got to the province and we said we needed to do these things because the province has been very supportive and very helpful in filling in those financial gaps for us. I have no reason to believe that's not going to be the case again.
Vaccination rates. We saw, excellent rates here in Ottawa. Do we have any idea of what sort of the fourth dose vaccination rate looks like at the moment, and who's eligible right now?
Yeah, so we need some work.
Okay.
In that, the first and second doses very high in the city, probably the high, close to, if not the highest, right across the province. So we really worked well in the city, and the residents stepped up and got the shots. But only 56% of our population right now has a third dose of the vaccine, and so we're in a much better place than we were. Last time we saw, surges happening. There are a lot of people vaccinated, but 56%. There's a lot of room for improvement there. So we're ready, willing, and able to provide vaccinations to those individuals. Our clinics are still open. Our neighborhood hubs are still open. And there's plenty of vaccine to go around. So now is a good time. And the other thing is that we don't want to lose sight of the fact that people are tired. They're very tired, Derek. They're tired of course, sort of curtailing their social activities and getting together with family members and just doing normal things. So, we realize that, and we understand that. So the other thing is we're urging people, don't necessarily, lock yourself in your basement, but at the same time, address the risk factors around you.
Right.
How old are you? Who are you going to interact with? You're going to interact with seniors in your family, with young kids in your family. Are you immune compromised? You're going to be spending time with someone who is. Take all that into account before you decide, I want to go out to that restaurant, or I want to go to the movie theater, or get together with friends. Work that into your assessments, your risk assessment as you go forward. And because we have seen there's definitely an impact of people sort of having to socially isolate, not be in contact with family and friends as often as they would like to, curtailing on the normal activities that they would do. And that's a health issue as well. So, our message is get vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, get that booster if you don't have it. And if you are going to go out, and it's important, we recognize that, to have those connections, very important, just assess the risk around you, the people around you, the activities you're going to partake in, and then make that decision.
Keith, just quickly want to touch on this motion from you that we saw on the council agenda considering a commemoration for the Eastway tank victims. Can you just expand on that for us?
Yeah, so I mean, I think everybody knows the story. What happened on that day? It was the most horrible industrial accident we've had in the city, I think, in 40 or 50 years. 6 people died, and it seemed important to me that we recognize that, we acknowledge that for the victims and their families. So I reached out to the to representatives from each of the victims' families, as well as spoke to the country, not Country Place, but the Maryville Gardens Community Association reps. And I said, this is the closest city park. It's a nice, quiet area. What does everybody think of planting some trees in memory of these individuals, putting a plaque in so people can remember what happened, and it's just a quiet place that family members and friends want to gather and remember the individuals. The families were supportive. The community of Maryville Gardens was supportive of that happening. So
not surprised,
I have no reason to believe that there won't be support tomorrow for it, and we can move forward. That probably in the fall, with tree planting in the fall, and putting a bench in for people to sit and think, contemplate about family or friends that passed away as a result of the accident.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a motion that'll easily go through, Keith. Keith, always appreciate you joining us here on the Rob Snow Show. Thanks so much.
No problem at all. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. That's Keith Eglai, City Councillor for Knoxdale Maryville Ward and the Chair of the Ottawa Board of Health. Coming up after the break, Professor Ian Lee. We've got lots to talk about with him here on the Rob Snow Show. This is Derek Fage filling in. You're watching on Rogers TV and listening on City News.
Being a crossing guard works great as part of my schedule as a high school student because I still have time to do my tests and assignments while earning a little bit of cash on the side.
Working as a crossing guard fits into my current lifestyle because it gives me a lot of time during the day to pursue hobbies that I'm very interested in.
A friend of mine introduced me to this job. I didn't know it was actually a paid job.
I always start my day. It's a very little, I guess, few months baby, and she always comes with her dad on her pram, and the smile she has, like, oh my God.
Well, I think the OSC is a very good employer. They show quite clearly that they care about you. They're very polite.
They really make you feel like you're part of a family.
It's fun. I really enjoy it.
Gets us out of the house, too.
Yeah.
Number one for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, June 21st. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, 15 degrees. Here's what's making news this hour. Councillor Keith Eglai says wastewater numbers, one of the COVID indicators being used, is starting to trend up again in the city. Eglai tells the Rob Snow Show with Derek Fage public health is monitoring, and as for paying for all of this, the province has been very good with what it called a one-time payment, but also said there are additional costs and they can be covered as well. Eglai Davis says with a vaccination rate at just 56% on a third dose, he says there is a lot of room for improvement there. Ontario residential school survivors reflecting on this National Indigenous Peoples Day. Diane Hill sits on the board of Survivors Secretariat. That's an organization dedicated to sharing the truth of what happened at one of those schools, the Mohawk Institute Residential School in Brantford. She describes that school as hell on earth. At 10 o'clock this morning, pre-sale for tickets to City Folk Festival in September go on sale. Lineup of artists is at ottawa.citynews.ca. The festival will be split into a pair of 3-day weekends this year at the Great Lawn at Lansdowne. It includes artists like John Fogerty, Black Pumas, Kathleen Edwards, and the Glorious Sons. City News Time, 9:35. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Strong voice.
Strong opinions.
The Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Rob is off today. Derek Fage here filling in for Rob. This is one of my favorite parts of each week listening to the Rob Snow Show, because we really get to dive into Canadian economics. This morning with the professor, we're going to dive into and do a deep dive on inflation and what governments do to make inflation worse or better. Joining us on the show, as usual, Professor Ian Lee from the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Good morning, Professor Lee.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm all fired up. I am all fired up to have this conversation with you because you sent me a story this morning with the headline, Top Economist Mohamed El-Erian says the everything bubble is over. It's a paradigm shift away from a silly artificial economic world. What does this mean exactly?
Derek, I've been arguing this. I don't have his eloquence or his platform. Mohamed El-Erian is a very, very well-known international economist. He was the chief co-CEO of PIMCO for many years, and now he is the chief economist for, I think it's Alliance, which is an enormous, gigantic, multi-gazillion billion-dollar company. Allianz, A-L-L-I-A-N-Z, for those who want to look it up.
Yep.
And he's also the president of Cambridge, not the operational academic president, but I guess the chair of the board of governors or something like that.
Right.
Very, very experienced individual. He's been in markets all his life. He's not an academic, not that there's anything wrong with that. And he's argued, and others have too, but he's got the stature and the platform because he goes to Davos and he speaks to UN and he speaks to international leaders and so forth. And what he's arguing is that for the last several years, I would say 5 to 7 years, he says 10 years, we've been living in this artificial economic world, not grounded by fundamentals. So, for example, to bring this down to earth and make it concrete for everybody, Western countries, Canada did too, by the way, so did the Federal Reserve, Bank of England, drove down interest rates down to literally almost zero.
Right.
Literally almost zero. And we did it, and we told ourselves, and central bankers looked earnestly into the cameras, and prime ministers and presidents said, we've got to save the economy. We're just a step away from Armageddon and oblivion. We did this in the pandemic. We remember this.
Yeah.
And even though the world had survived, we've had interest rates in central banks for several hundred years. The Bank of England goes back 400 or 500 years. And we've had horrible things in the past, including, oh my goodness, a depression. A real depression in the 1930s.
Of course.
And we never ever drove interest rates down to 0.25% or zero, and the world didn't vanish. The world didn't vanish. It didn't disappear. And so where I'm going with this, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do and help people when they need help.
Right.
But what we've done, I think, in each successive really time that we run into a jam or some trouble, is we bring out the most heavy of the nuclear artillery, and to go after sometimes a problem that doesn't require that. In fact, I would say each time it didn't require that. So what's happened is that our whole economic framework has it's created a bubble, and it created a real estate bubble. Of course, if you drive interest rates down to almost zero, guess what? People are going to go out and borrow like crazy.
Right.
And it created bubbles in cryptocurrency. It created bubbles in commodities. And so what he is arguing is, and I think there's an enormous amount of merit there, is that we finally realized that these solutions that we thought were so clever in the last these several years, such as driving interest rates down to save everybody, it created far more problems than it solved. And so what he's saying is that we're going to be returning, I think he's saying, to fundamentals where interest rates represent reality as opposed to this artificial bubble that has been unreal, untethered to the underlying fundamentals.
Because we just go back and forth with it, don't we? We bring them down to help out, and then inflation goes up, and then we have to bring them up to help bring down inflation. I mean, it's...
Derek, I'm not suggesting rates should never go up or down. I'm not trying to say that they should just be one fixed rate forever and ever.
Well, of course.
What I mean is that if you look at and I've looked at graphs, beautiful graphs from the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and Bank of Canada, from the beginning of each of those central banks up to the present. And, they'll go up and down, 4% up to 6 to 8 to 10, that sort of thing. But they never, ever were driven down to this unprecedented, and I would argue unsustainable and unjustifiable level. And so we were involved in these almost panics. I remember the language at the time of the COVID, and yes, I understand. I was worried too about getting it, but I'm not talking about that. I understand the fear around COVID at the time before we had any vaccines. I get that.
Yeah.
But the language of the central bankers, and I mean, I've even heard them since saying we stopped the economy from falling off the cliff and everybody just, collapsing. Well, this was nonsense. This was just, the idea that people are going to stop eating or stop producing, we didn't. We created a temporary, artificial situation. We told everybody to go home. It wasn't a real organic recession caused as past recessions where the economy just runs out of steam. It was man-made. I'm not supposed to use gendered language. Okay, it was a person-made recession. We told everybody to go home and stop working, and then the moment we ended the lockdown, which was only 60 days later, guess what happened? The economy snapped right back.
Right.
And yet we used that as justification to drive them to rates that we've never, ever done ever in modern human history. And we created these inflation bubble, we created the real estate bubble, and so what he's saying is this is really a frontal criticism of the decision makers in our largest governments, U.S., Canada, England, UK, and so forth, and saying, look, you've got to come back to reality and ground decisions not in ideology, but in the fundamentals. And so I think that this is going to be a wake-up call when this is over. Where the interest rates aren't over, by the way, the rate increase.
No, there's more coming in July, right?
There's more coming for the rest of the year because there's still, if you can believe it, after these two or three rate increases, we're still below what is estimated by economists to be the neutral rate. In other words, we're still in stimulative territory. We're stimulating the economy.
Right.
Just as Chrystia Freeland is sitting there with a straight face saying, we're going to fight this inflation, and she's pouring gasoline on the fire, which is the deficits. And I'm not one of these people who say that all deficits are always bad forever. I've never believed that.
Yeah.
Any more than I think borrowing is bad. Borrowing is bad if you're borrowing to buy frivolous things, but if you're buying a house which is a long-term asset, you pay it over a long time, that's called an investment, or a business that invests in a business. That makes sense. But in this instance, we were really, really frivolous, I think, in terms of our monetary policy and our fiscal policy, and yet we are still stimulating the economy with fiscal deficits and with interest rates below the neutral rate, and that's according to the governor of the Bank of Canada himself, by the way.
Right.
And so we're in this just crazy time.
So how do you fix inflation? Okay, what you're saying, I agree with you. What you're saying is these interest rates have been completely unrealistic. We should go to sort of this neutral interest rate, but that's not our reality today. And Scotiabank just recently saying Trudeau is shirking Canada's inflation fight.
That's right. So
what has the bank said about that, and so how do we fix it now? Because
there's two separate separate issues.
It's not working.
So this is a good news, bad news story.
Okay.
Let's do the interest rate side. I've read the speeches very, very closely of Governor Macklem. He is appointed as the governor of the Bank of Canada, so we got to listen to him, right?
Yeah.
And I've read the monetary policy report very closely, and there is a very real recognition. And it's not, they're not faking it, that they realize they really messed up in the last year and that they're about to fix it. And he's getting very, very, he's saying, we made mistakes, now we've got to rectify it. So I think they're going to. I think there's going to be another 0.75 increase in the next announcement. And I think by the end of the year, we're going to be well north of 3%, so we'll be north of the neutral range, which will suggest mortgages in the 5 or 6% range, not counting the stress test, which you have to stress test 2 points higher than that, suggesting you have to be approved for a mortgage in the 8% range, which is going to really cool down the real estate market. But on the fiscal side, so on the monetary side, I think we're going down the right road. We're not going as quickly as I'd like them to, but we're going down the right road. We should have done it sooner, but he's recognized the problem, and so he's addressing it, he and the Bank of Canada. On the fiscal side, there's almost a bubble in the cabinet. I mean, whenever there's a problem, and I've watched this over the last several years with this government, any kind of a problem for anything, they have one solution: we're going to spend more money. We have a program. And not all program, not all solution, not all problems can be solved just because you stand up and announce more money. And I'm not saying we shouldn't spend money. I mean, the government spends buckets of it, I assure you. $400 billion a year, if anyone really wants to know the number. That's the government of Canada.
Yeah.
That's almost $500 billion a year. That's net of COVID. I'm not talking COVID spending. This is baseline spending. In other words, core spending year after year. Okay, so I'm not suggesting we're going to stop spending gargantuan amounts of money. What I'm saying is there's no recognition when you listen to the finance minister or the prime minister that, we just can't, every time somebody pops up and says, I've got a problem, we say, okay, we're going to throw another several $1 billion at you.
Right.
And we've created this bubble. It's almost a government bubble, a government of Canada bubble on the fiscal policy side. And there's no recognition thus far that bubble, that mentality has to come to an end, especially with the aging of the population, where we're going to have almost a quarter of the population over the age of 65, far fewer people in the workforce supporting those older people, and it's going to change the whole economics. They're still spending like it's 1972. In fact, the government right now is talking about making unemployment insurance yet more generous.
Yeah.
Even
when there's a million jobs available.
We can't find jobs for. I mean, there's a million vacancies.
I know.
And they're saying, oh, look, we want to make it easier to get unemployment insurance so we can even mess up the economy. Well, they're not saying that, but I'm being a little bit flippant.
I hear you. You know what? Professor Lee, I'm going to take a quick break here. Well, we're going to come back with you because I want to continue talking a little inflation and talk a little bit about the Keystone Pipeline talks that happened yesterday between Freeland and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. So we'll be back in just a moment. This is Derek Fage filling in on the Rob Snow Show right here on City News.
To be honest, this is my job for more than 20 years now. My big inspiration came from this because it was my grandfather-in-law who invented the concept of image totale and immersive experience.
And it's really immersive. So for people that have never experienced one of these immersive shows or events that you put on, how would you describe it to them?
I would say to them and to those visitors that they're just going to enter in a dream come true. When you're in the exhibition, entering in this room, it's like walking in a dream. It's like walking in the garden of Claude Monet, between those flowers, between those water lilies.
Claude Monet is a name that everybody knows. I mean, quite frankly, it's so famous that you just say Monet and everyone knows exactly who you're talking about. We're all familiar with Claude Monet, but, for people that don't really understand how incredibly influential he was, just tell us a little bit about Claude Monet.
If I have to define Claude Monet, I would say that he was a revolution as itself, which means that, it disrupts all the art history. Before, we were talking about clear lines, we were just defining all the contour of the object we were painting, all the figures, And Claude Monet arrived, and he said that he didn't want to paint any object. He wanted to paint the distance between him and the object. And that changed everything, because what you see is just a mirage.
Right. How do you choose the pieces? I mean, he has so many, of course, famous pieces. Will there be pieces that you've kind of found that maybe even some of us aren't even familiar with?
Oh, most of them are very familiar.
Right.
You know, he was painting during his entire life, and he died. He was really, really old. But we had to choose, because I was working about those choice with Androula Michael, who is one of the most important art historian of the 19th century. And I would say that we choose the most important one. You will see 200 of paintings. I would say cut in 3,000 pieces in half an hour, and with a loop, you know. But I would say most of his art will be there.
The world is changing.
So keep up with Rob.
The Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV, filling in for Rob. On Monday, when asked to reduce gas taxes in the House of Commons, Chrystia Freeland said she is not ruling anything out. However, she said a cut to the gas tax would hurt efforts to shrink the deficit. As I said off the start, is this really the time to consider shrinking the deficits after 7 years of spend? Now you're looking to cut back on deficit spending with record inflation. We've got numbers coming in tomorrow that many economists predict will be well over 7%. Ian Lee, professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University, joins us for our second segment. What do you make of that? I mean, is it frustrating to you as well, Professor Lee, to hear the Minister of Finance come out with an excuse such as that?
It is, because I want to state very, very clearly for everybody that she's spinning. She's wrong. Let me explain that apparently strong statement. She said, well, we can't cut gas taxes because it will increase the deficit. Everybody got that? Mm-hmm. That is bogus. The government is spending $400 billion a year. In other words, let's say you cut, just a thought experiment, you cut the gas taxes temporarily by $20 billion.
Okay.
You said, well, that makes the deficit go up by $20 billion. No, it does not necessarily. If you simultaneously announce $20 billion in cuts across the panoply of the government of Canada that is spending $400 billion. The technical term is you sterilize the reduction in gas tax revenues. You sterilize the impact on the deficit. Sterilize meaning you mitigate it, you eliminate the impact because it would otherwise increase it, by simply offsetting that revenue you have given up on, e.g. carbon tax or gas tax, and you then go to some other department or departments and you cut an equivalent amount of spending so that the deficit doesn't go up by 1 penny.
But we know they're going to argue on that. Well, what can we cut back on? We can't cut back on health.
They'd have to then contact Prime Minister Chrétien, former Prime Minister Chrétien, former Prime Minister Paul Martin, and they figured it out with the largest downsizing in Canadian history. And Canada did not vanish in 1995. It's still here. We're all still working and living as citizens. The country did not go away. The city did not disappear, and they did the largest downsizing in Canadian history. So to say that in $400 million that you can't find $5 or $10 or $20 billion in cuts is just simply preposterous when you consider that only 2 years ago they were spending $300 billion. Now, is there anybody suggesting that for 2 years ago in 2020 that Canada was some kind of a third world country like Somalia or Ethiopia? I don't believe that.
Right.
I just do not believe that, Ms. Freeland. That is not true. We were extraordinarily affluent 2 years ago, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, when we were spending $300 billion. Now we're spending, according to the Treasury Board Secretariat main estimates tabled in Parliament, in the budget, we're now spending $400 billion a year. So in 2 years, we went from $300 billion to $400 billion. I think we can find $5 or $10 or $15 billion of cuts in there.
Possibly.
To sterilize reducing the gas taxes.
Well, what about the reopening of the Keystone Pipeline? They say both Yellen herself, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, said that won't address high oil prices. That said after meeting with Freeland. Right. Certainly the talks won't address it, but if we had a pipeline right now, that would probably help.
Dealing with liberals and progressives, I mean it. I mean on a factual level. Mm-hmm. So let me explain what I'm saying. Okay. This is part of what Yellen, the finance secretary, the treasury secretary, or what we call the finance minister, is she's doing this silly artificial economic world that Mohammed El-Arian is talking about.
Right.
She is saying, look, it won't have any impact on supply and demand, or on supply. Her own administration, her own president, who appointed her, is and his minions, his aides, his assistants, his bureaucrats, are negotiating with Venezuela, and they're negotiating with Saudi Arabia, and they're negotiating with Iran for what? More oil.
Right.
So she's saying more oil from the Keystone will not help us. By the way, we're looking for more oil, as long as it didn't come from the Keystone.
Right.
Well, oil is fungible. Fungible meaning one molecule of oil of West Texas Intermediate is identical to another molecule. So it really doesn't matter whether it's coming through a piece of steel called Keystone or coming from a tanker coming in from Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or Iran. It doesn't matter. In other words, they want more supply of oil, and Keystone could provide that. So this is an example of ideology taking over and obscuring and undermining the thinking of a otherwise, very intelligent individual.
Well, and Canadian petroleum producers are saying that they're in discussions with the government. They can increase production. They're also stating, though, that transportation issues could hamper the efforts. But okay, I understand that. I get that. But why not increase production? And then let's worry about the transportation issues after that.
I agree with you, and in fact, what we're seeing, and again, this is what Arian was talking about, this silly artificial economic world, where we announce that we're going to end oil and gas and make the go away, and we think by the act of announcing it natural Germany did that. They shut down their entire nuclear, and they're shutting down and have been shutting down natural gas-fired turbines that generate electricity. So what do they produce? A huge shortage, as we know. So what are they now doing in Germany? It's in the papers in the last 5 days. They're ramping up production of coal. Coal is the dirtiest of all the fossil fuels. So we're going to shut down natural gas and we're going to shut down nuclear so we can go back and use the dirtiest of the dirtiest of the dirtiest. This is the logic of progressives on the environment. And this is going on. China, by the way, is ramping up huge amounts.
Oh, they've been building.
Coal.
Yeah, they've been building.
And yet we're saying let's shut down the cleanest, which is natural gas pipelines and the production of natural gas, and oil, which is much cleaner than coal, by the way. So they're saying, no, we got to shut down these cleaner sources so we can let them use dirtier sources. Now, does anybody understand that logic?
I don't think many. Professor Ian Lee, I was just saying to one of my colleagues here, I want to come and sit on some of your classes. I really do. Professor Ian Lee, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us again today.
My pleasure, Derek. Thank you.
All right, take care. That's Professor Ian Lee from the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Really one of my favorites to listen to. Regardless of your political affiliations, this is a guy that I think uses a lot of logic and breaks down and uses facts and studies and does his research. Now, on that discussion that we just had with Professor Ian Lee, this is our question for the Talkback Hour, because it's time for your opinions. This is we love hearing from you. Our number here, 613-750-1310. The question is simple. Is the government doing enough about inflation? Do you feel like they care about your cost of living? And maybe you have some ideas you can share as well. Maybe you have some ideas on how we can tackle inflation, on where we can cut back on taxes to help us all with your cost of living. We'd love to hear your point of view. 613-750-1310. I'm Derek Fage filling in here on The Rob Snow Show, and you're listening on City News.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Today is a very exciting day. We are officially opening the Interzip Rogers for the summer season of this year. Last year we were expecting to have maybe 20,000 people, and we actually had over 30,000 riders for the first year. So we're really excited to reopen this year.
That was epic and scary!
You have a really different perspective view-wise of the area we're in. So you have a clear view of the Parliament. Obviously you're crossing the river, and of course you're moving from a province to another, which is unique of this zip line. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Rogers has been partners even before Interzip opened, actually. They were all in the first meeting we had with Rogers, and that for us was really a nice commitment. We're really fortunate to have Rogers with us, and on top of having Rogers, it's basically the name of the zipline, which is the Interzip Rogers, that is now pretty much renowned across the country.
Rogers Interzip is a great activity for people who live in or visit the National Capital Region. Get out and have an opportunity to zip across the Ottawa River between Ottawa and Outaouais.
This is City News.
CIWW 1310 AM in Ottawa.
And CJET 1011 FM in Smiths Falls and the Valley. Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 1011 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, June 21st. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, 15 degrees, and here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Ottawa Board of Health has updated the fight against COVID. It was pointed out at a meeting last night, indicators of COVID in our community are once again on the rise. The chair, Keith Egli, addressed that on the Rob Snow Show with Derek Fage.
We're in a much better place than we were. Last time we saw, surges happening. There are a lot of people vaccinated, but 56%. There's a lot of room for improvement there. So we're ready, willing, and able to provide vaccinations to those individuals.
Now, Egli says that just 56% of those eligible with a booster shot, that shot number 3 of COVID vaccine, he says that mission is to get that number up. City News time at 10:02. There is a severe thunderstorm watch now in effect up the valley. This stretches from Armpire through Petawawa to Deep River. Now with your forecast, here's meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Below average temperatures for the start of summer for Ottawa, the Valley, Smiths Falls. Today there will be some wet weather at times today and tonight. 20 degrees for the high. That's it. The average high is closer to about 25, 15 for the low, and a chance of some thunderstorms tonight. For today, the high, 20.
And right now it's 15 degrees in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls. A motion will be brought to City Council tomorrow to have a portion of Merivale Gardens Park dedicated to victims of the Eastway tank explosion. 6 people died in that explosion at the facility on Merivale January 13th. Councillor Keith Egli says the motion tomorrow, which has the backing of victims' families and the community, will have trees planted, a plaque in honor of the 6, and a bench for quiet contemplation. City News time, 10:03. MPs will spend this final week of the spring session of the legislature, the House of Commons, deciding whether to keep a hybrid model for a little while longer. With the details, here's City News reporter Laura Carney.
Will MPs return to Parliament Hill in the fall completely in person? That is the debate to close out this spring session. The Liberals had the support of the NDP to continue with hybrid sittings for at least one more year, while the Conservatives say they should be signaling it's time that Canada return to a pre-pandemic normal. But Labour Minister Seamus O'Regan says the option to appear virtually makes the job more appealing.
Look, I'm a big fan where you can be here in person. You should be here in person. I do agree with that. But to have that flexibility for so many MPs who have young kids and families.
And the Liberal House Leader points out just last week, 5 members, including the Prime Minister, had COVID-19. Now, whether in Ottawa or in their home ridings, MPs are getting a safety boost. They are being given panic buttons, and it's in response to threats and rising concerns about harassment. Laura Carney, City News.
Now, in provincial politics, it appears as though former provincial NDP leader Andrea Horvath may take a run at municipal office. Horvath issued a statement yesterday saying she wasn't ready to make an announcement about the election in Hamilton. While she was re-elected to the legislature, she did step down as party leader. With Hamilton's mayor not re-offering in the fall now, talk is Horvath will seek that chair. And prices may be on the rise, but it certainly hasn't curtailed your spending. StatsCan says gains at general merchandise stores helped retail sales rise 0.9% to $60.7 billion in April. Sales at general merchandise stores gained 4.2%. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Talk back.
Hello. On the Rob Snow Show. The phone lines are open at 613-750-1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
The Rob Snow Show continuing here on City News. 101.1 FM, 1310 AM, and it is the Talk Back Hour. That's right, it is your hour. We love hearing from you. The number here, 613-750-1310. Very straightforward conversation we're having with you in the Talk Back Hour. Is the government doing enough about inflation? Do you feel like they care about your cost of living? Like, I feel like they live in an alternate fiscal reality of some kind, where they don't understand. I mean, even though, and they say it all the time, oh, we're listening to Canadians, we listen to Canadians, we travel around across the country, we listen to Canadians. Canadians are telling us that they have a difficult time putting food on the table and a roof over their head. We're listening, but what are they doing? I'll go over a few things, but we already have some callers calling in again. 613-750-1310. Is the government doing enough about inflation? Maybe you have some ideas on how to tackle inflation. We would love to hear from you. Let's head over to our first caller, Phil in Ottawa. Phil, how are you this morning?
Very good, sir. You?
I'm good, thank you. You fired up about this topic this morning, Phil? What are your thoughts?
I'm fired up and fizzling out. You know, when we look at government, really, can we be honest? The system we have, be it liberal or conservative or NDP, God help us, is a system of self-preservation. The liberals are going to do what they want to do in the way of spending to keep liberal numbers going up, and the conservatives are going to do the same thing. We're not going to solve the problem of the economy if the government doesn't realize it has to curtail its spending and downsize the government. We have to come to the realization that you can look at it at a municipal level. To think that we have police officers on the police force here in Ottawa, little over 1,400 strong, let's say, for example, member-wise, making over $100,000 a year.
It's a good living.
Sir, excuse me, go ahead.
No, I just said it's a good living, that's for sure. I mean, my hat's off to our police officers.
And if you can get it, good for you. But the point I'm trying to make is we can't sustain at this level with the pension liabilities that are attached to this. There are going to be people retiring from the police department. There are people on sick leave. And I don't want to pick on the police department because they do their due diligence. They work hard for their money.
Of course.
But we have to say that, can I afford the Cadillac or can I afford the Prius? And can I afford the 5-bedroom house or can I afford the small 3-bedroom bungalow? We have to come to the realization that we're downsizing in our lives. Children are leaving our homes. Our money is being dwindled because of the hours we're producing on a daily basis, and we're winding down. Now, Mr. Ian, Professor.
Yeah, I was just going to quote him actually, because you're talking, you're really talking a little bit about what he almost wrapped up with there.
Well, I want to make a contradictory statement to what he said.
Okay.
He made a comment that look at the way they're using coal in China, and the dirtiness of coal. We got to get our head out of the sand, and we got to realize that coal produced in China, not all of it, and don't quote me as an absolute.
No, okay.
But coal produced in China is dug up in China. The coal, some coal that is going to China is being shipped. The cost related to and the environmental impact is on the shipping of the coal around the world. You want to buy your Prius, you want to buy your hybrid, you want to buy your electric car, you have to realize that these parts are going to come halfway around the world on a boat, and the impact on the environment is going to be caused by that.
Not solely by that. Phil. I mean,
absolutely.
No. The reality is,
I'll give you an example to merit my point.
Okay, you give me an example.
There was a study in the U.S. at a Berkeley or whatever university level that ran the carbon footprint on these, and they compared a U.S. Hummer compared to a hybrid car, and as far outweighs the carbon footprint to buy the Prius or the hybrid that's shipped halfway around the world, because the diesel used to bring in here. We have to go localized. Food commodity. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I know you have a lot of calls.
Yeah. No. We're packed here, Phil. Finish up your thought quickly here. I mean, I don't agree with what you're saying. I don't think that.
Well, let's go to micros. Let's do it on a.
Well, we can't do that, Phil, because I've got a ton of callers. I've got a ton of callers here. But I appreciate your.
I'll wrap up my point real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Look at your green truck on Tuesday picking up your recycling bin.
Okay.
How much diesel are they burning? Come on, folks. Be smart about it.
Listen, the recycling I went over. I mean, when it comes to plastic recycling, thanks for the call, Phil. Appreciate it. The numbers there don't add up. I mean, if you're gonna talk about the amount of fuel that's burned and coming by and picking up your recycling, and 9% of what you recycle in plastics only gets actually recycled in this country. Yeah, you know what? I'll give you that. But shipping coal around the world is costing more money than coal production in China. That's when you lose me. Sorry, Phil. All right, we got some more callers here. Let's head over to Kevin in Hull. We do have one line available, by the way, 613-750-1310. Kevin, what are your thoughts this morning?
Well, I liked what the Conservative government in the UK did recently with the windfall tax on oil companies, and they will take that, I think it was 19 billion sterling, and help people pay their heating bills, and those who need it the most, give that back. That to me sounds logical, because a lot of these increases are based on oil company, and they have these record profits.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And the price of the barrel, I think, was up to like 140. Maybe it was not all that long ago, but yet the price of the pump was lower. So there's some kind of perhaps intentional sluggishness on refining. It's a multifaceted thing. Sure, they pumped in too much, but there's also some gouging, and there's a few things that are leading up.
Well, and the government in itself, right? I mean, as all of these costs go up, the taxes that they get back from us on fuel, on groceries, I mean, you name it, across the board, they're reaping higher tax revenues at the same time as well. So, you're fighting deficits, I get it, but you're also, I mean, there's a lot more money coming in to help you fight those deficits. And
well, you made a good point with Ian as far as where do you cut, right? That turns into that debate. Like, obviously, healthcare is hurting right now, the waiting times and stuff. So that's tricky.
It is tricky. I'm not gonna pretend that's that's easy to do.
Cutting some of these consumer taxes would be good, but you'll have to replace the revenue somehow, and the windfall tax on BP, Shell, and all them seems to me a good place to start, as well as how much do we subsidize them for a year?
Oh, the subsidies in many industries, right? I mean, if we want to dive into that, Holy cow! Do some research on that. Anybody listening right now to see some of the industries in this country that we subsidize by millions and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right there's some of your perhaps there's some of the savings that Professor Ian Lee was discussing that we can find.
It seems ironic though that I'm supporting a conservative plan, which I normally wouldn't, but that's what is the party in power in England, and that was their plan.
And I don't care who you align yourself with, Kevin. Even in this country, the Conservatives, obviously the official opposition, because we have an NDP Liberal kind of coalition at the moment, right? And they're the only opposition. And I don't care what you think about the party itself and whether you would vote for them, but I don't know how you can possibly argue that cutting taxes, your gas tax and carbon tax on fuel right now isn't the best way to go to help Canadians now. I know there's some other programs that are in place, but those programs aren't helping at this very moment. That's part of the problem that we're seeing here.
Well, at least the government's not pouring loads of money into Bitcoin.
Yeah, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Kevin, thanks so much for the call. Really appreciate it. I want to remind everybody, our question today, is the government doing enough about inflation? Do you feel that they care about your cost of living? Do you have any ideas on how we should go about tackling inflation? I think the easiest ones, that we've talked about over the last few weeks. How about a gas tax cut? Can we not get one? No, said the finance minister. Cutting taxes on gasoline won't be happening. She said a cut to the gas tax would hurt government efforts to shrink the deficit, and pointed out that Canada's climate change policy provides payments that offset the costs of consumers of carbon pricing. But again, that's a wait-and-see approach. That's not an everyday approach. That's not something that we're seeing right here, right now. We have one line available, 613-750-1310. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with your calls after this. I'm Derek Fage, filling in here on The Rob Snow Show, and you're watching on Rogers TV and listening on City News.
The sun's calling, change with the warning. I won't win anything if I give everything.
I was so excited when I found out that I was given this grant to be able to make this concert, because I knew it was going to be the first opportunity that I was able to play these songs for others. This album was recorded really, truly in isolation. Like everybody else, we were locked down for a bit. So you're going to see, I think, the joy of playing live, of being together.
For me, as someone who owns a business in Ottawa that's directly working with music, I own a recording studio, it is important because it gives a sense of confidence in terms of having support from a lot of different places. We all know in Canada, there are all kinds of city, provincial, and federal people who provide funding for artists, and just seeing how invested Ottawa is and expanding the reputation of Ottawa as a music and entertainment city, running a business in that city, it makes you just feel better that someone's going to support you, help you, and have your back.
Well, firstly, I'm seeing friends that I haven't seen in 2 years, so that is kind of stabbing me in the heart a little bit, but I'm also just so happy to be able to make art with all of these friends again. And I've been treated like an absolute rock star from the moment I just kind of knocked on the door and said, hey, can I unload my gear? Everybody's so helpful, and you're just used to kind of dragging all your stuff around, and it's such a hard business to be in. So this is a dream come true for any local artist who gets to participate in a series like this.
Oh, I feel like I need to keep pinching myself. It's an amazing experience and opportunity for us, so thank you so much. It's been a long couple months. Our last show was in December. This is the first time we've actually been in the same room together since. So it's really an amazing opportunity for us, and the beautiful theater, and to have Rogers here, and thank you, Oh Mike, and so it's a dream come true.
I'm here with one of my best friends, Alex, and we haven't performed in almost 2 years because of COVID. And it feels really good to be back on a big stage like Meridian, and I'm really honored that you guys invited me here today.
Having an organization that lets the artists
do their thing with such a range of styles and influence, and to kind of have that ability to meet the public and to meet the people who would listen to them can't be overstated. So super excited about it. I know a lot of musicians in town and a lot of music lovers in town who are really excited about it too. So I mean, it's an event in which there's talk, there's a lot of buzz around it, and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes on for a long time and does a lot of great things for local musicians and connecting them with the listeners that love them.
It's time to talk back.
On the Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Rob is off today. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV, filling in for Rob. Our question for you today in the Talk Back Hour. Is the government doing enough about inflation? Do you feel that they really care about your cost of living? Do you have any ideas on how we should tackle inflation? By we, I mean the government. Are they doing enough about inflation? Let's head over to Patrick, who's calling from Quebec. He's been waiting for quite some time. Patrick, how are you this morning?
Very good, Derek. How about you?
I'm doing well, thanks. What are your thoughts on this topic this morning, Patrick?
Oh, this is a sticky one.
Yeah.
The government is doing way, way, way too much. And I think great intentions produce, unattended consequences. What we're seeing right now, in my humble opinion, is the result of, good intentions when the pandemic hit.
Right.
To protect people, we paid people to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you think about it, not even the communists did that. And the problem becomes that a society that doesn't produce while we're pumping liquidity will ultimately, in a very short period of time, hit people where it hurts. And now we're seeing it right now. It hurts because the purchasing power of the dollar, of our Canadian dollar, is going down. And so gas is going up, and food is going up, and wages aren't going up.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point about the amount, and there's no doubt in my mind, no matter who would have been, in power on any level of government, be it provincial or federal government, but we're specifically talking about the federal government today, is that, they were going to have to spend a lot of money to help us get out of the pandemic.
Yes,
countries around the world did that. However, if you're looking at, cutting deficits, let's take into consideration all that money that had to be spent is no longer being spent, right? Because many of those programs have actually wound up. They've wound down, I should say. Many of those programs have wound down, so those extra costs aren't on the books anymore, or won't be moving forward in the books. So there's cost savings right there and then. So the argument that you're not going to cut taxes because you need to tackle the deficit, it just doesn't make any sense at a time like this when so many people are in a desperate situation.
No, and I honestly feel that this is just the beginning. We're using old tools, so we believe that if raising rates will somehow curb demand, the problem is that people are indebted to a point where if you raise rates, bubbles going to burst everywhere, even at the government level. And so it's a zero-sum game. Raise rates, and the market crashes.
I agree with you. Well, you raise interest rates, and you see, you saw that I think it was 1 in 4 Canadians would say if they see another, let's say half a percentage point or even 0.75 they're talking about, perhaps going up in July, that they would not be able to pay their mortgage.
No, exactly.
And to fight inflation alone by raising interest rates, and we put ourselves in this position. I think Professor Ian Lee said it perfectly. We should have had more of a neutral interest rate instead of bringing them down to these record lows where everyone went, oh, now I can buy an $800,000 house because my interest rate is, 2%, and I'm going to amortize that over the next 30 years. Well, what if that goes up to 5%? You're in big trouble. Even if it goes up to 3%, you're in big trouble.
Exactly. And the vast majority of Canadians are, myself included, we're all in that boat, right?
Oh, yeah, Patrick. The latest stats also show we're spending, I believe it's $1.82 to every dollar we make. Now, for some of us, do we have to show our own fiscal responsibility? Yeah, sure. There are people that spend more than they're making, and they're, and what than what they need, and they feel that they, that they have that they should be doing everything else that they see the Joneses doing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I need the 2 vacations a year and 2 cars and 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath home. Sure, we all want that. Some of us, though, know we can't afford it and we still do it. But we're talking about, people that are fiscally responsible that are still struggling. That's the problem right now, right?
And more will. And so the government has done a lot, way too much. It contributes. I mean, inflation is a monetary policy, right? If you look at M1, M2, or M3, the monetary base, and you've seen how it has grown in the last 2 years. It's grown 38%. Some people say I think it's at 45%. I mean, all of this liquidity has to go somewhere. And again, it goes to where everybody spends on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And the only way to curb that, and this is where the government is not helping.
Okay.
So it's energy policy is all about, restricting supposedly, dirty energy in order to, go for green energy. The problem is that you want to increase productivity on a very vast scale. That's the only way. If your rate of productivity increases higher than the rate of inflation, then your purchasing power is protected. And so the government would need to change completely its energy policy, say, okay, we screwed up. We're in a lot of pain. We will make it easier. So, we will take out obstacles for any type of energy to be able for Canada and Canadians to produce. But this also means that for us, we need to get off our butts.
Yeah, well, you have to make the changes now.
Start producing like hell.
Yeah, and you're right. It has to happen now. I mean, what was it? Freeland said yesterday, the energy crisis that she, says, that we see Putin's invasion of Ukraine is certainly prompted. She says is yet another reason to take climate action really seriously. Yes, you're correct, but we're not there yet.
Exactly.
You need to prepare for a transition from oil and gas to electric each and every day. You can't just throw out an arbitrary timeline and say, you know what, all manufacturers have to go to electric vehicle manufacturing by 2025, end of story, and then just sit on it.
Yeah.
You have to force these manufacturers and you have to force the industry itself to start their transition. And it's not all relying on us. I mean, there's going to be tax incentives, trust me, in the hundreds of millions of dollars for this transition to happen. And if you're going to do it, well, just do it now. Thanks so much for your call. Really appreciate your call today, Patrick. Let's head over to Roger in Drummond. Good morning, Roger. What are your thoughts on this morning?
Good morning, Derek.
Good morning.
Well, I'll start out with the fact that the people that's running the show here, the federal Liberals, they don't care about what's going on with us because they don't feel our pain.
Yes, I agree.
Now, you heard last week about the jet setting with the environment minister last year at the climate summit, and then even the governor general, which really disappointed me, on their entourage, how much they spent on their... So it's our money, so they don't... Why should they worry about cutting back anything or caring about you or I or anybody, because they're not feeling nothing, okay?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's part of the problem, for sure, Roger.
Now, if they could walk a mile in our shoes, maybe they would have a change of attitude. Some of them, anyway. Some of them just can't. It's just the type of people they're like. When you're born wealthy, like Mr. Trudeau and Judd Meek saying, I call these people dandies.
Okay.
A dandy is somebody that's born into wealth, doesn't have to do anything for themselves, doesn't have to worry about nothing. Okay?
Yeah.
Life just keeps going on, and it's just glorious in their minds,
Yeah, and I respect the fact that they wanted to get into politics. Not an easy job, but I agree with you. They grew up in a completely different reality than the rest of us.
Now, Derek, your household, our household, and millions of households in Canada, what we're going through right now and the cost of everything. So I got to say to my wife, I was talking to her yesterday. I said, well, we haven't went on a holiday for probably 3 decades.
Wow. Yeah.
And if we do, if you count like going to my relatives for a few days as a holiday, that's not the same,
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
We haven't went on to a nice trip, so we thought about going to St. Jacobs there in September, and then then this morning, we had a change of heart. Said, well, what's it going to cost us to go to St. Jacobs? Because we were there before, and I love the Mennonite, the New Order, the Old Order. I love that whole area.
Okay.
And we haven't been there for over 20 years. But then we got thinking, well, gas. I have a truck. That's the only thing I have left because I use the truck for my job. So we're down to one vehicle, but it's an 8-cylinder truck. So I figured it would cost us, and it's a pretty good truck, well looked after, but it cost us $1,000 in gas to go there and back to St. Jacobs.
I'm not surprised, right? What does it cost for one fill-up? Over $200 now?
Well, okay, from a quarter tank on my truck, it's 132 liters. Well, to fill it up from empty would cost me close to $300.
Holy jeez!
And I'm using regular gas.
Right.
And it's very well maintained, but it's a truck.
Yeah. I got you.
For work, and I'm not getting rid of it. It's just too good right now to switch it to something else. I don't see anything different. But just getting back to something else. So we say to ourselves, in order for us to survive, because we worked hard for everything we got, and like most Canadians.
Yeah, of course.
So we have to say, well, instead of us having something we want that we don't really need, but we want it, well, we are not going to have that. We have to put that money towards eating and paying our bills.
Right.
Now, this is where the government, like Ian Lee, he hit the nail on the head. A $400 billion budget, okay, and you can't find 5% savings in that budget and pass it on to Canadians with getting rid of a lot of the tax on the gas would be the best thing to do, okay?
Yeah.
Because that consumes everything that we consume. Everything that we have is
the trickle down
type of fossil fuel.
Absolutely.
And there's no doubt about it. And then everything that we buy is going to be taxed at a higher rate because everything has gone up more, and the government keeps collecting more. So if you're a householder and you want to keep your place, you take 5% savings, and you'll find that 5% savings anywhere.
Yeah.
Because in government, at every level, Derek, there's so much waste.
Roger, I couldn't agree more, and I hope you and your wife finally find a way to get on a vacation, a real vacation at some point. 3 decades is a long time to wait. Really appreciate the call today.
Just one more thing, okay?
Quickly, Roger.
We're fortunate. We have some land here, and this is where basically our holiday's been for years.
Yeah.
We are blessed that way.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I have a cottage too, so I certainly feel blessed as well, Roger. I understand where you're coming from. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks for the call, Roger. Hey, Hugh, Mark, Garth, I see you waiting there. Don't worry. I'll get to you just after the break here, after the news. We'll be back in just a moment. This is Derek Fage, and you've been listening to The Rob Snow Show on City News and watching on Rogers TV.
The Calgary Stampede is a world-renowned festival celebrating wrangling, bull riding, and everything cowboy. But did you know that many people credit its origins to a Black Canadian? Take a minute to meet John Ware. The word cowboy has racist roots. Before the American Civil War, white ranchers were called cowhands, but the enslaved black men and women working alongside them were actually referred to as cowboys to infantilize and disrespect black ranchers. The legend of cowboy John Ware is full of impressive feats and awe-inspiring skill, including the ability to train even the wildest broncos and easily hold a horse on its back. But the real story of John Ware is one that starts from more humble beginnings. Ware was born into slavery in the United States, gaining his freedom towards the end of the American Civil War in 1865. Ware's skills with cattle ranching developed as he traveled throughout the United States, eventually settling in a town southwest of present-day Calgary, Alberta, which made him one of the first black pioneers in the prairies. Over time, news of Ware and his amazing cowboy skills began to spread, and people came from across North America to witness his horsemanship and skills as a rancher. Eventually, Ware went on to own many of his own ranches. In 1892, he became the first man in Western Canada to earn the title of steer wrestler, and Ware's feats in local contests set the stage for the Calgary Stampede Rodeo we know today. In September of 1905, Ware was killed in a freak accident with his horse, and more than 10,000 mourners from across the region attended his funeral, making it one of the largest in Alberta history. Though his true story is difficult to separate from the legends around him, Ware's status as a respected forefather of cowboy skill continues to be celebrated today. Ware has dedicated monuments across Alberta, including several sites near his first ranch, a Calgary school in his namesake, and a building at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology.
Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, June 21st. Good morning. I am Damilola Unime. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, it is 16 degrees. And here's what's making news this hour. Only 56% of Ottawa's population have rolled up their sleeves for the third shot of the COVID-19 shot, and we need to do more. That's according to City Councillor Keith Eglai on the Rob Snow Show. He says while the city is doing a lot better than it was during the first spike of the virus, there's still room for improvement, especially as the 4 months draw closer. Statistics Canada says gains at general merchandise stores helped retail sales rise by 0.9% to $60.7 billion in April. Sales at general merchandise stores gained 4.2%. Core retail sales, which exclude gas stations and motor vehicles and part dealers, rose 1%. And early estimates for retail sales in May suggest a gain of 1.6%. And the City Folk Festival is coming back to the Great Lawn at Lansdowne this year with 6 days of live music this September. Some of the performers include John Fogerty, the Black Pumas, Tim Hicks, the Glorious Sons, and Ottawa's Kathleen Edwards. Pre-sale tickets are now available, and the full lineup of artists is at ottawa.citynews.ca. City News time is 10:34. I am Damilola Unime. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Talk back.
Hello. On the Rob Snow Show. The phone lines are open at 613-750-1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Derek Fage here, filling in for Rob. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. What a great talk back hour we've had so far. The lines have been lighting up like crazy. Our question, quite straightforward. What should our government be doing to help with inflation? And more importantly, are they doing enough? Do you feel like they care about your cost of living? As I said, lines are lighting up, so let's head over right away to Garth in Nepean. Good morning, Garth. Thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts on this morning?
Good morning, Derek.
Good morning.
I don't know if the federal government is doing enough to tackle inflation. I don't think they understand or care about the average Canadian and our circumstances. And I think it's going to manifest in a number of protests over the summer and into next spring because people want freedom from fiscal and economic.
So you think maybe the language will change? I get you're probably referring to, we've been hearing about another sort of convoy coming for Canada Day celebrations.
And into the summer.
Yeah, and we've seen obviously mandates have been lifted. In particular, the travel mandates, where the government has made a complete 180-degree turn in the last couple of weeks. So that's kind of obviously off the table now. But maybe the language changes to what you're describing here, Garth. Maybe the protests will be more like around the state of the cost of living for Canadians.
And the mandates were a part of what the freedom protests were about, but another large portion of that was about the state of the country and what's happening with the Liberal and Trudeau government and their policies. I think with the rising costs of fuel, especially for this upcoming winter for heating, in the spring, you will see the anger of Canadians because of the cost of just trying to make it through the winter. I received notice from Enbridge Gas, saying that because of the war in Ukraine, the limited amount of natural gas will drive the costs up by 36%. Your bill will be going up by at least 36%. So again, we're going to the average Canadian is going to have to tighten our belts, while I think politicians just don't see the necessity for themselves to do the same, to follow suit. If they want to put their monies where their mouths are, they should be taking large pay cuts, giving up portions of their pensions that they'll be receiving long after they're out of office. If they want to truly show that they have concern for us, the average Canadian, then do the right thing. And, you want to save, they want to bring down the deficit, well, then you take a large pay cut.
Yeah, you do your part.
And you do your part, and we'll do ours.
And you know what, Garth? I think they care, but I think, the caring happens in such a bubble for the federal government, and that, we care about Canadians and we're going to do something on climate change. Well, right? These are such big issues that aren't fixed overnight, that are constantly talked about, and they're important subjects. I get it, but can we break it down to a more reasonable level that speaks to all of us as Canadians? Yes, climate change is an issue. We all agree. It happens every time there's an election, a federal election. It ends up in the top 5, the top 10. Yes, okay, but enough of that talk, and let's start talking about how you're going to help us today with our cost of living.
Their concern will be amplified, like I say, coming soon, because the Canadians will really voice their concerns, and if they don't start really listening and taking real action, then they'll find themselves out of a job, and then they'll be in the same boat as we are.
Yeah, well, some of them may be, but as you described earlier, they're making good money. I mean, I think their retirement future is looking a hell of a lot better than ours, isn't it?
Yes, sir. And again, we'll see how the summer and spring. We're going to have a Canadian spring coming in February, and we won't have a truckers' convoy because the Liberals and Trudeau have made it the price of fuel so expensive that the truckers can't even bring their trucks here.
Garth, I can't say I would be disappointed if they didn't come. I'll tell you that. Garth, really appreciate the call. We're going to talk, by the way, Michael Taube joining us a little bit later on the show. We're going to talk about the Freedom Convoy, folks. More accurately, one group called Veterans for Freedom said they are coming back to Ottawa on Canada Day and may hold more rallies, protests throughout the summer. We're going to get his thoughts on that. They're saying they're going to meet with as many as 17 MPs. I think for those people that live through it, especially those in the downtown core, they are certainly not looking to have another convoy come back in and occupy downtown. I don't think it's going to happen to the extent it did before, but it would certainly be frustrating for all of us here in this city to see that happen again, regardless of how angry you are with the government. Let's head over to Hugh in Ottawa, who's been waiting patiently. Hugh, good morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing, Hugh?
Not too bad. I'm just noticing something
with
what's going on right now, because it looks like it's an amalgamation of a couple problems here.
Okay.
So we've got some financial issues that are coming up here, and it looks like most of this is being driven by the value of energy,
right?
Or at least what the value is being set for energy, by what looks to be a cartel of sorts, if you will.
Okay.
So that's different than anything else that we're really dealing with, but we're also dealing with a climate crisis at the same time.
Of course.
And that climate is being driven by the type of energy that we're using.
Yes, absolutely. I follow you.
So right now, we just went through a pandemic wherever
I think
from there.
Okay. Sorry, I lost you for just a moment. I got you back here, Hugh. Go ahead.
Okay, so it looks like during the pandemic, we were all told to go home and work from home, and that's what we did. And now we're being drawn back into the office. So everyone's back on the road burning gas again and driving the value of this energy back up again. But the government's not doing anything to step in to reduce the amount of energy that we're using as a whole. Now, our use of this energy is driving the price of it. So why are we doing nothing to reduce our usage, to reduce our cost?
Yeah, I think a lot goes into that. I mean, you even heard, I believe, from certain city councilors asking the federal government to bring employees back, right? So that, you know, they start using public transit again and start, you know, helping out the small businesses that rely on them and putting a lot of onus on that. There's no, but you bring up a good point. I mean, the more people that you bring back to work, certainly the more energy is going to be used getting them to work, and you know, the office space itself to run the office space and so on. There's no doubt, but the transition is going to happen, but it needs to happen at certainly a faster rate, Hugh, than we've seen so far if you're going to really tackle climate change. And again, I think for a lot of Canadians, they're like, okay, can we just look at some other issues right now other than climate change when we are responsible for less than 2% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the entire world? That's not what I'm worried about right now. That's what I'm hearing.
The average citizen, they seem less concerned about climate change than they seem to be about their pocketbook. So let's just focus on that.
Yeah.
Ignore climate change. Let's just look at the pocketbook. If we keep on using energy the way we are, it's going to continue to cost more because the demand is there.
I agree. I'm not saying ignore it, Hugh, but you can't keep coming back to it. And that's, I think, the issue that many people have, is that the federal government just keeps coming back to it consistently.
Well, it's true, but the cost is being driven by generally the suppliers. As Mr. Biden said last week, Exxon made more money than God last year.
Oh, yeah.
That's not acceptable either. We have to be rational within society, and that's not happening here either.
I agree with you there, Hugh.
But also right now we have cars. We're all running our gasoline cars. Everyone we'll just switch over to electric. But they say, well, we'll just have to wait for these foreign manufacturers to supply Canada with all these electric cars. Mm-hmm. That's insane as well. Why would they prioritize us over their own countries? That makes no sense.
Well, and we've poured some. Listen, there was a big announcement with the federal and provincial government. Thanks so much for the call, Hugh. Appreciate the call. Putting in, I think it equaled out to $260 million to a manufacturing plant, car manufacturing plant. I believe it's somewhere near Mississauga. I may have the area or the region wrong, but the point is $260 million in incentives for the transition to happen. So, I mean, we do want to produce electric vehicles here in this country. I agree, but as Hugh just described, I mean, the supply is not there. The demand is not there yet either, because you're starting at $45,000, $50,000 per vehicle, and there is no used vehicle market. If you look at the car market in itself, the used vehicle market is a big part of that. And you can't even get a new one because it's a waiting list. Never mind get a used one, because most people don't have $45,000, $50,000 to throw in a car. Listen, our lines are lit up. I apologize for going on here. I'm going to get to everybody, I promise you, after the break. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be back in the final segment for the Talk Back Hour. Our number, 613-750-1310. This is Derek Fage filling in for Rob Snow, and you're watching on Rogers TV and listening on City News.
Electric Sport RC is a indoor RC facility with 3 different courses, all under one roof. We have bashing, crawling, and racing. And bashing, you can see just right here to my left. It's a dirt track, kind of like a skate park, but for RC trucks. Change it up regularly. It's a lot of fun. Kids just love to rip through the dirt, and so do adults. And then right behind me over here is our crawler track. You essentially drive an RC truck, one of these bigger ones, over an obstacle course made out of rocks, wood, and dirt, and other things. We've got some bridges, some rope bridges, all sorts of challenges. Very challenging and addictive, and it's fun to do with kids and parents alike. And then we also have the race course, which is 10,000 square feet and 600 tons of clay.
Wow.
It's great for taking all sorts of cars around, but we also have a racing community of about 30 drivers. They tinker with their cars. It's a really good entry point for kids to learn about electronics and engineering while they try to edge their competition for the thrill of the win.
What a great, Dan, as I said, I can see it becoming, addictive and, people working on their machines constantly to improve them and that sort of thing. So you have different sort of days, right? So let's talk about Wednesday nights, first of all. What's the setup for Wednesday nights?
Wednesday night, it's about 30 drivers who get together. It's a pretty intense competition. They're really fine-tuning their cars. We also have Friday nights, which are a bit more relaxed. It's a bit less about who's winning and more just a great place for people to get more into the racing hobby. And then Saturdays and Sundays are just kind of a more open family-type atmosphere. All three courses are there to play on, and it's just a great atmosphere, welcoming community and people who just want to enjoy playing with toys.
Dan, let's talk about the popularity of the sport, because as I said, I can see people immediately falling in love with it, whether you're doing it competitively or just recreationally. Over the years, what sort of popularity have you seen? Have you seen a growth in the popularity of the sport?
Absolutely, especially in the recent years with the pandemic. People have been buying RC cars to play with at home, in their yards, on the street, or in parks. We built this facility because we wanted to have a place that's specifically built for RC cars that families can come to. It's just great for all ages, and you can get into any type of RC driving while you're here. If you just go on our website, you can Google Electrosport RC to find us. You can sign up there for an introductory session. We'll show you around the facility, get you up and going.
Time to talk back
on the Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Thanks so much for spending some time with us this morning. It is the final segment of the Talkback Hour, 613-750-1310. Our lines have been lighting up all morning long. Thanks so much for all of your calls. We're going to dive right in with Mark in Ottawa. Good morning, Mark. What are your thoughts on this topic this morning?
Well, the high cost of living, high gas prices, wouldn't it be nice to have some mean tweets and $1 gas? There is a dementia patient in the White House that nobody's talking about. Time to freaking talk about the dementia patient in the room.
All right, Mark. Mark, sorry, I'm going to let you go here. Let's show some respect. Obviously, he's referring to, I imagine, President Biden. By the way, Miss Yellen, who we talked about earlier, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, has said that addressing inflation is primarily a responsibility of central banks, but added that she and U.S. President Joe Biden are considering a range of policy options that could help, including reducing the deficit and raising some taxes while considering a gas tax cut. So if you're wondering, just where the headspace is with our neighbors to the south, they're seeing record numbers in inflation themselves as well. I believe their inflation rate is at about 8.6%. So again, this is a global problem. This isn't just a Canadian problem, but guess what? This is Canada, and this is what we're talking about at the moment. What can our government do? Certainly whatever the United States does can affect what happens here in our country. But just a reminder, if you're going to call, just be respectful. If you don't like somebody, that's fine, but we don't have to call names, especially, bringing up something that is a big issue for many people. Let's head over to Russell in Ottawa. Russell, welcome to the show. What are your thoughts this morning here on inflation and how our government is doing in tackling it?
Our government is creating it, not tackling it.
Yeah.
They are doing absolutely nothing to tackle it. They need to quit printing our money and devaluing our currency, and then inflation will clean up. The other thing that we need to do is I think it's really time for our society in Canada to have a discussion about no longer having career politicians. Career politicians get in there and this is all they do. They get fat paychecks, double the median family income in our country.
Right.
Plus then a fat pension at the end of it. How do you not get corrupt?
Yeah, Russell, I agree with you somewhat. I certainly respect people that get into politics. It's certainly not an easy job, but again, I agree that everything has changed so much, and political parties they're only interested in staying in power or getting in power, seem to be losing the interest in actually serving Canadians.
Right.
And that's the most disappointing part for me.
Correct. We were taught in school, and I graduated in 2000, so I went to school in the 80s and 90s. That politicians were supposed to be the best and brightest of us. And now they pretty much just leech off the system for the most part. There are some good ones, but really, if we want inflation under control, we need to stop printing money. And on the environmental part of the conversation that's trying to happen, anybody who believes in the environment, if you want to cut greenhouse gases, we need to get rid of coal. It's 64%. If we don't get rid of it, it will never happen. It doesn't matter what any of us do with our cars or houses. That means nothing. As long as the world's burning coal, we will have high greenhouse gas.
Yeah, and we still have countries such as China and India, for instance, that are actually still building coal plants. I think people forget that.
They don't have a choice because we're not supplying them with natural gas. And hey, guess what? We're not supplying them with natural gas, making money for our country on the natural gas and reducing our taxes here.
Yeah, and that's
the most backwards government ever.
Yeah, that's interesting because Chrystia Freeland even brought that up, saying, you know, that we have the ability and the resources and the people and so forth. She said, you know, here's a quote from her: "The world's democracies," speaking of China, "the world's democracies do not want to depend on Russia and China for the critical minerals and metals it takes to build electric batteries or semiconductors or to power nuclear reactors or to create fertilizer or even for sources of energy. That is not just safe anymore. And guess who has almost all of this stuff? We do. Canada does." Right. Okay. Well, then let's move.
Right. Yeah.
Let's move on it.
What she said, and it wasn't just more virtual signaling from the virtual signaling king.
Yeah, you can't just talk out of both sides of your mouth like that, right? On one side, she's, you know, mining is bad, and on the other side, hey, we have all of these minerals and metals here in this country to help build electric batteries. I mean, it just drives me absolutely nuts.
Mining is bad. Oh, and another interesting thing about electric vehicles.
Quickly,
there is an OECD report about the greenhouse gas costs of gas versus electric.
Yeah.
And the electric vehicles were like 3 tons over their lifetime more than the gasoline vehicles. It's just at the inputs, not at the outputs.
Right, and we still haven't done enough research. And you bring up a good point, Russell, on all of those numbers. It's all well and good. I mean, you know, we have changed from what we think is the best and cleanest energy over many years, and who knows what's going to happen down the road. Russ, I got to let you go because I want to get to a few more callers here before we run out of time. Let's go to Mike in Ottawa. Mike, good morning. What are your thoughts on today's topic?
972.
972. What is that number?
That is what I have been living on ODSP for the last 3 years.
$972 a month.
I don't even know where to start.
Unbelievable.
January 6th, 2019. 2 of us went to the hospital, 1 stayed home. 2 of us came out of the hospital. We had COVID a month before Trudeau even admitted COVID was here.
Okay.
January 8th, 1 died. The other one was in the hospital recovering from a fall. There's 3 of us now living in this house, okay? I pay $300 a month in rent for my room, okay?
And you're forced to, I mean, you're forced to live in that kind of...
ODSP.
Right.
Because I have a disc out in my back. My shoulders are wore out from working construction all my life.
Okay.
You can put your hand on my shoulders and all you hear is crunch, crunch, crunch. My elbows, my back. I was getting therapy and getting an extra $100 a month for gas to go see the therapist for my back. I do not get that. I haven't got that in over 3 years since this COVID started.
I'm sorry to hear that, Mike.
I'm so sick of these fake environmentalists. When it comes to plastics, the biggest plastic and greenhouse gas is the pop bottle industry and the water bottle industry with their plastic bottles. I want to buy my Coke and my Pepsi in a glass bottle like I used to do when I was a kid, and you could take them back with a deposit, just like the beer bottles. And these environmentalists want to reinvent the wheel all the time.
Okay, Mike,
every time you manufacture one glass bottle, you could wash out and refill a zillion times. One plastic bottle you have to break down and remanufacture the same 100,000 times for the same one drink of pop or one drink of water.
Mike, I appreciate your passion. I'm going to let you go because I want to get to
one more thing. Jagmeet Singh and his Armani suits and is riding around on his $3,000 bicycle. His suits are more money than people receive on ODSP. 1 week of his suits in the House of Commons is more than anyone makes on ODSP, and we ain't making money on ODSP.
I hear you, Mike.
Falling behind. And
I
all
understand.
these nickel and dime taxes hurt the poorest people of all.
Agreed, Mike. Mike, sorry, I'm going to let you go. Again, as I said, I appreciate your passion, appreciate the call. Let's quickly go to David in Ottawa. David, you're my last caller in the talkback hour. I got to go really quickly here. What are your thoughts?
I just want to echo the sentiments of a large portion of the callers that the government, I don't think, cares really much about inflation. Otherwise, they wouldn't be creating it.
Oh, I just lost you, Mike. Sorry, there's David. Sorry. You're back, David. Go ahead.
The government, did it themselves with pumping money into an economy which was already going well. It was unnecessary to do that. And with the interest rates rising, what's going to happen with the national debt? With rising interest rates, it's going to increase by millions a day. And my biggest fear is that Trudeau just, as I say, they don't really care about this. They haven't had to suffer like a lot of the majority of people, especially like your last caller is a perfect example.
Yeah, no kidding.
He's just my prediction is, another year or so, he's just going to take a walk in the snow like his father did and just say, well, leave the mess behind. And when that happens, when are you ever going to get a good candidate again for prime minister? Because who's going to want to take on that mess? It's just, it's just lose all the way as far as I can see.
Yeah, a lot of people are feeling the same way as yourself, David. I'm starting to feel, I hate to say it because I do, as I mentioned a couple of times, I have a lot of respect for people that get into politics, but it really is becoming frustrating just with this feeling of, you don't understand where we're coming from, where ordinary, everyday Canadians are coming from. Really appreciate the call, David. Thanks so much. I just want to say to everybody that called in today, thank you so much. I really respect your passion for the topics that we bring up on this show, and today was no different. Obviously, people frustrated with how the government is not doing enough, or as far as many of you are concerned, doing nothing when it comes to tackling inflation and helping with our cost of living. Don't go away. Lots more coming up here on The Rob Snow Show. I am Derek Fage, and you're watching on Rogers TV and listening on City News.
City News.
CIWW 1310 AM in Ottawa.
And CJET 1011 FM in Smiths Falls and the Valley. Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 1011 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, June 21st. Good morning. I am Damilola Unime. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, it is 16 degrees, and here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. The chair of the Ottawa Board of Health says the community really responded to vaccinations for COVID-19. But Keith Eglai tells the Rob Snow Show with Derek Fage that numbers have really slipped for the third shot and the booster shots. Eglai says this is troubling because COVID-19 indicators are on the rise.
We are starting to see the wastewater numbers go up again. We're starting to see some more outbreaks. So again, we're looking like we're trending upwards, unfortunately. And so these are things that we're going to have to respond to, get more people vaccinated.
And the board says the province wrote a one-time check to cover COVID-19 costs and have indicated more money is available if needed. And a motion will be brought to City Council tomorrow to have a portion of Maryville Gardens Park dedicated to the victims of the Eastern Way tank explosion. 6 people died in that explosion at the facility on Maryville on January 13th. With the weather forecast, here's City News meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Below average temperatures for the start of summer for Ottawa, the Valley, Smiths Falls. Today, there will be some wet weather at times today and tonight. 20 degrees for the high. That's it. The average high is closer to about 25, 15 for the low, and a chance of some thunderstorms tonight. For today, the high, 20.
And a judge has rescheduled the state trial for 2 former Minneapolis police officers in George Floyd's killing to October 24th to resolve dwelling requests for a new trial date. The state had sought to start as soon as this summer, while a defense lawyer asked to delay to next spring. 2 officers are charged with aiding and abetting murder and manslaughter in the 2020 killing of Floyd. Judge Peter Cahill earlier this month postponed the trial until January, saying it would improve prospects for a fair trial. He settled on October during a hearing today. I am Damilola Unime. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Firm.
Fair.
Fun.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News 1011 FM
and 1310 AM.
Ah, yes. Firm, fair, and fun. It's a great description for my next guest, as a matter of fact. He's a columnist with Troy Media and Looney Politics and former speechwriter for Stephen Harper. Michael Taube joins us here on the show. Good morning, Michael. How are you today?
I'm good, Derek. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Let's dive right in. Couple of columns in the Sunday newspapers this weekend, Michael, predicting that Justin Trudeau may take his own walk in the snow after his confidence deal with the NDP expires ahead of the next election. It's been a pretty rough 6 months for the Liberals. If we review some of the recent files, we've got the ongoing committee investigation into the cabinet's unprecedented use of the Emergencies Act. We've got the vaccine mandates for travel, where the government's made this complete 180-degree turn in the last 2 weeks, and an official with Foreign Affairs, if that wasn't enough, an official with Foreign Affairs attended a garden party at the Russian embassy. I'm sorry to laugh, but it just seemed unimaginable that actually happened. And then the passport office fiasco. We're still seeing these lineups. People look like they're camping out. When you lay it all on paper, it really doesn't look very good, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's not to sound egotistical, but many columnists, including myself, have already suggested or predicted that Trudeau most likely will not run in the next federal election. But you can't say it with certainty.
Right.
You're right to say that certainly with the first 6 months of the Liberal-NDP agreement, which is supposed to run until 2025, it hasn't been sterling, far from it, in fact. And you have mentioned some of the biggest controversies, which I'm sure have been discussed on your radio station many times, and I've chatted with others about it too. Mm-hmm. We all have, in fact, and that's part of the problem. Generally speaking, in the news cycle, you want to, if something happens, be it a controversial story or whatnot, you hope that it doesn't last more than 1 or 2 days, because if it does, it stays in the public mindset, and even if it isn't being cycled on a regular basis, you know it's still there. All the issues that you've mentioned, obviously the Emergencies Act, that committee is obviously major, and that's going to go on for a while, especially due to Marco Mendicino's, sort of two-faced approach to it, basically, where, on the one hand, he claims that, well, no, it was pretty clear that the Ottawa Police and the RCMP basically, quote-unquote, gave him the get-go. But on the other hand, the RCMP and the Ottawa Police have both come back and said that, sure, we discussed the possibility of the Emergencies Act. That would certainly be part of any discussion, but we never told them to actually activate it. And for that reason, it stays in. The vaccine mandate has obviously been a perpetual problem and will continue to be. That even though the Liberal government have done a 180 turn on this whole issue, the fact that it took them so long and the fact that Canada, amongst most Western democracies, was among the slowest to actually bring these things down and sort of try to bring society back to normal, or whatever the new normal becomes, that was frustrating to a lot of people. And you also pointed out the whole thing with the ridiculous affair with the Russian embassy party.
Oh, my goodness.
Which I have a piece coming up in the fairly shortly, so I'll wait to do most of my discussion on that. But I think most of it has been chattered on. The simple fact is, why would someone even fathom to do something like that? And whether the explanation from the office of Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister, where her staffers anyways have claimed that there was an email that circulated out, but they missed it, certainly possible, and that does happen in Ottawa, but at the same time, you need to change things so it doesn't happen again. And again, it's just another bit of egg on the face of the Trudeau government.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for free food and free drinks, Michael. But even as just a regular everyday citizen, if I happen to get an invitation to visit the Russian embassy to celebrate Russia Day, I am turning that down. How anybody and any government level could possibly go there. I just don't understand. The other thing I look at too, and Rob and I have talked about this in the past, when you talk about the beginning of the end of Justin Trudeau, is there's oftentimes just this fatigue, whether you're happy or not. Sometimes you're just like, you know what, they've had their time in office. This would be trying to secure a fourth consecutive election victory. That hasn't happened in more than a century, right? And look at recent past. Stephen Harper, Jean Chrétien, they're the perfect examples. Do you see that fatigue being a part of this as well, just on top of all of these things?
That's true. Although, to be fair to Chrétien, he didn't run for a fourth term.
Yes,
but
true.
You're right.
True.
But generally speaking, no, you're quite correct. It has not historically worked out for most prime ministers who've lasted that long, or they've had little breaks in between that time. We even saw it, say, with Pierre Trudeau near the end of his run, where he lost in 79 to Joe Clark, got lucky when everything sort of fell apart with that gas excise bill tax, and then he was able to go back in for an additional 4 years. But generally speaking, federal governments in Canada do not last 4 terms. Regardless of the fact, do I agree with you and Rob that fatigue sets in? Absolutely, it's 100%. It's very different when you start out and when you finish off. You get very comfortable in Ottawa. You get very comfortable with your surroundings. When you win a few elections, you don't necessarily think you're invulnerable, but you think that it's going to be very difficult to penetrate you when it comes to the policies that you believe in, the policies that you want to pass, and the policies that you feel are best for the country. And again, that's how democracy works, where ultimately the voters decide whether they're happy with your agenda or not. That's obvious to you. It's obvious to me. It's obvious to all the listeners. But sometimes when you're in office, you're enclosed in a bubble, which Justin Trudeau certainly is, and his advisors are, and you start to think, is it possible? Could, for example, the Liberal NDP agreement, if it is successful over 3 years, which thus far, as we've said correctly, has not been, but it could change over the next few, if it remains successful, do I then do I bite the bullet and try one more time to see if I can get that difficult fourth term? I can't see it happening.
Okay.
I think that he's been extremely lucky the last 2 times out, quite frankly. The Liberal Party has finished second in the popular polls, but based on the way that our first past the poll system works electorally, he's ended up with the most seats. But again, 2/3 of the country, by and large, has either not been pleased with this government or not content with them at all. To try again for a fourth, it'd be pretty stunning. But then again, as you correctly said, when people who fly blindly and go to a party which is run by an embassy, managed by a tyrant and a dictator like Vladimir Putin, anything, unfortunately, is possible.
Well, and you wonder if ego comes into play with Justin Trudeau. I think,
well, certainly
people have talked about that, about Justin Trudeau, and maybe he wants to leave a legacy and be able to say to himself, hey, you know what, I'm the first prime minister in more than a century to secure a fourth consecutive election victory.
Sure.
Maybe that happens too. Do you see him getting any pressure from within the Liberal Party to step aside? People have enough guts to do that?
Yeah, well, yes and no. It depends what you believe. I mean, there's been chatter for years that there has been pressure for him to step down both in 2019 and 2021. Do I think it really went past a certain point? No, I doubt it. And do I think that those that started it, if they did, really thought they were going to be successful? I strongly doubt it. But now I think you can make at least a strong argument that if he was lucky to have got through the last two federal elections, which he undoubtedly was, and if he is able to, manage things for a while with this 3-year agreement that is really has never lasted as long as that. I mean, historically, agreements or alliances between parties, whether it be major parties like the Liberals or NDP or even the PC Liberals. In fact, in Ontario, there was an alliance, as people may remember, during the Bill Davis years with the NDP that lasted for a while.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, these agreements don't last more than, say, 12 to 18 months on average. It's like a minority government. It's not terribly different to that. To assume that this is going to last for 3 years would not only be historic and monumental in this country, because it just doesn't happen, it would be astonishing that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, even though obviously they're happy to be as close to power as, quite frankly, they were ever going to be, I think at some point temptation gets in, your ego starts to move in the way, and you start to think that, well, I've created a good agreement for myself, this being Mr. Singh and his advisors, and obviously some things are going through, but could I get more? Or has Justin Trudeau finally tired out the political left in this country that they're looking for another option, knowing full well that the Green Party is not going to grow anytime soon, and that parties like, say, on the left, like the Bloc Québécois, are obviously limited to one province. So I'm not saying the NDP would suddenly bump up the way they did with the late Jack Layton in 2011, but temptation always exists.
Yeah, some excellent points. Well, we got lots more to talk to you about. We're going to take a quick break here. Michael Taube, columnist with Troy Media and Looney Politics and former speechwriter for Stephen Harper, will be back with me right after the break. I'm Derek Fage from Rogers TV, filling in for Rob. You're watching on Rogers TV and listening on City News.
It really is a tremendous source of excitement and joy for the theater staff and I to welcome artists finally back to the theaters. It was a tremendous pleasure to sit on the selection committee. We really have something to cater to all musical tastes, from trippy art pop to straight ahead rock and roll to soul and funk. But it's huge for us to be able to welcome local artists back into the theaters to showcase their amazing talents for people here.
Up to the top is where I'm headed and I'm going.
You know what? I've checked out some of the stuff already before doing this. I've been hyped and ready to do this because it's definitely being done on a major level. And, I'm here seeing it in person right now and I'm like, wow, this is what it is, man. I'm happy to be here.
This kind of concert series promotes music and gives us newcomers or even like new bands a big chance to showcase their talents and share their music with the world.
It's amazing that OMIC has organized this and given an opportunity for artists to perform, but also be part of something that I wouldn't be able to create this just on my own. So everybody's talents comes together to create something great.
It says a lot about the city that they are engaging the processes that get those musicians out and get them in front of people, and the music is getting heard. So we don't have a thing where like everybody's the best kept secret, right? We're sort of breaking through that wall a lot, and which is exactly what we need.
Well, first of all, I'm really grateful for this opportunity. For me, it's a little bit like being officially part of the local artist community in Ottawa. And it's like my first real big show where I'm going to be performing my own songs, so it's really exciting.
What the hell's going on? Why you still holding on?
You know, it's a great opportunity for us artists to be able to really get a reach to an audience and a good quality audience too. I'm just happy that I can be involved. I'm happy that I can add value. It's top tier for sure.
It really is like a dream come true, especially having so many restrictions in the last couple of years, not being able to jam because we couldn't get together, and then to be able to do it in a beautiful venue like this with the seats in the background and just the whole entourage of it, and really feeling like we're able to put on a real show for the first time in a long time. It's just fantastic. It really is great.
He's a pillar of community opinion.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM
and 1310 AM.
Well, welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Derek Fage here filling in for Rob. Michael Taube, our guest, columnist with Troy Media and Looney Politics, former speechwriter for Stephen Harper. And we turn our attention to another topic, and that is the Freedom Convoy folks, or more accurately, one group called the Veterans for Freedom, say they are coming back to Ottawa on Canada Day and may hold more rallies, protests throughout the summer. Curious what your thoughts are on the political opportunity or even political risk here, Michael.
Well, we have to see whether it actually materializes or not.
Of course.
Suggesting, you know, you don't always necessarily lay your cards on the table, so to speak, and this is pretty open and wide. But then again, maybe if they are planning to come back, that's what they want. I mean, again, that's the strategy to make. What I think of it, again, it depends what happens. I mean, obviously, we know what happened the first time round, and whatever your opinion was on it, we don't have to rehash that whole story again.
Right.
I think people know that there will obviously be some levels of delays, some level of disruption, and also some interesting, conversations, controversial debate, a lot of talk about freedom and individual rights and liberties and freedoms, and all of that, is interesting in its own way. Some good, some bad, some ugly, and some nothing. We know that.
Right.
But what does it matter in the grand scheme? In terms of a political opportunity, I mean, obviously the Conservatives during the leadership race have talked about this issue to some degree. Of the 6 candidates, a couple have been a bit more forthright in terms of who they support or whether they support the truckers through this, including obviously the acknowledged front runner, Pierre Poilievre. So I would imagine that certainly Mr. Poilievre might make some comments or make possibly some appearance down the road. It's always possible. Leslyn Lewis, who's another private candidate who's sort of fighting for the same sort of base, might do the same thing. But again, those are just thoughts right now. We don't know what Mr. Poilievre or Ms. Lewis are going to do, and until they announce it, there's nothing much to say at this stage.
Yeah, it's going to be curious to keep an eye on that. Let's turn our attention. I talked to Professor Ian Lee about this topic a little bit earlier on, and that is inflation politics. Chrystia Freeland met with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen yesterday to talk about the economy, inflation, cost of living. One big bank is panning the Trudeau government's response to inflation in the news today. What do you make of the political side of this? Because we just had a full hour of callers calling in, Michael, and not happy with the response, and keep in the fact that it's always programs and these programs are coming, but most people are asking themselves or asking their government, what are you doing for me today? Is this a political mistake for the Liberal government, especially one, I guess, they could be catering to the NDP as well with some of these decisions, right?
Yep, no, they definitely are. Look, you obviously don't have to be an esteemed economist like Ian Lee to understand the very basic concept that you can't spend your way out of inflation, or you can't spend your way out of debt, or you can't spend your way out of a deficit. It doesn't work like that. The economic engine becomes successful when you build certain things, and part of that has to be fiscal prudence. In other words, the way that you spend money and spend money wisely. We know that you can't stop spending tax dollars completely. I mean, obviously,
of course,
in a perfect world, it would be wonderful, and trust me, if I could run on it, I would. But we all know you have to do something. But it's how you do it and how you rationally do it, combined with building the economy in other ways. In other words, pro-growth standards, which is more jobs, more businesses and projects are being built, lessening restrictions on foreign investment. There's a variety of ways you can do it. But this federal government is just not interested in that, Derek. And it's no surprise that Scotiabank spoke out against them, because when the Liberal government is suggesting another $8.9 billion to tackle inflation, all they're basically going to do is waste our money, as they continually do. They waste and waste and waste, and they won't stop. They've been doing it since they were first elected in 2015, almost literally from the very start. They will continue to do it until their very last day at either, shall we say, 24 Sussex or the cottage, if, Trudeau is still there at that time.
Right.
But regardless of the fact, I can understand why there is a lot of frustration out there, and even some Liberals are speaking out about it too, because it's nice to pay lip service and say we're going to spend all this money to help things along, but when your track record is basically spending it through the nose and producing nothing of substance economically or politically, quite frankly, then you have to question it. So I get why Scotiabank did. I can only imagine what the Americans might be thinking on the side, even though, Joe Biden and the Democrats obviously believe in spending, just maybe not to the level the Liberals do. It's going to be messy.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Michael, you said it perfectly. It's after 7 years of spend.
Yeah.
When Freeland was asked about, reducing gas taxes, she said to cut the gas tax would hurt the government's efforts to shrink the deficit. After 7 years of spending, now is the time for you to come out and start talking about cutting back on deficit spending?
I know. And also, by the way, it's nonsense what she's saying. If you actually reduce the carbon tax, you would reduce, at least at the pumps, we'd go down maybe 20 to 30 cents per every liter that we put in.
Mm-hmm.
And that would actually be beneficial to the economy. It would get more people going. It would allow people to go much further for work or whatnot and not have to consider alternative forms of transportation. And most importantly, it would get rid of Justin Trudeau's pet project, the carbon tax, which, I've written about it a million times. Others have too. It doesn't make sense in an economy, and it does not benefit you. This whole thing that we have to do our bit and do our little bit, help the environment in certain ways. Fine. There are other ways to do it. You can also use the private sector to help too. There are private companies who want to help the environment and have proposed things and programs that do work, but this government is not interested because the man who leads this country, or the puppet master behind them, if whatever you want to call Chrystia Freeland, who is the finance minister, but has jokingly been called, including by me, the de facto prime minister of this country, or the minister of everything. If they're not in favor of removing the carbon tax, they'll find every way to justify how to keep it.
Yeah, and I would say that Pierre Poilievre has certainly taken advantage of all of this. For people that don't follow on social media, let me tell you, I mean, I think he posts dozens of times a day. Let's be honest, oh yeah, for sure. The production value that he has is very good. He's a very well-spoken guy. Right. With that, taking that into consideration, I think, this government's playing into his hands, and that most certainly must be helping him in this leadership race.
Of course it is. I mean, he is speaking a language, or has created a lingo, if you'd like, if you want to be folksy about it, that actually resonates with a lot of people. Yes, it obviously resonates with younger people, millennials, Gen Z, whatnot, but it also reflects very well with, yes, conservative supporters, but also people who aren't necessarily conservative, but sort of regard themselves as independents, right-leaning on particular issues, but are tired of what they see coming out of Ottawa, and with the Trudeau Liberals the past 7 years, and they're just looking for an alternative. When you have someone like Poilievre, who, and I've said this many times on the show and others, and I'll say it again, I've known him since he was an intern in Jason Kenney's office. I endorsed him a couple of days before he was going to run. I didn't know he was going to, but I was hoping he would, and I'm glad he jumped in. Mr. Poilievre is basically using outside-the-box thinking along with his talent to craft a message and convey it to a large amount of people. When you have that all going for you, of course you would take advantage of this situation. The Trudeau government makes it so easy for him, and quite frankly, the other 5 Conservative leadership candidates to just blast away at them.
Is this a shoe-in then for Poilievre, do you think?
To win the leadership?
Yeah.
Yeah, now I would say so, because look, even
I think so too.
Even if the 312,000 number goes down to some extent, and everybody, by the way, historically in a leadership race, you can't even count on 50% of those people to go out and vote, even whether it's physically or virtually, via the computer. In the end, ultimately, he's got a massive lead. And the fact that Pierre Brown's numbers have now come into a bit of question, which is being discussed and I assume determined right now, and the fact that Jean Charest has still not revealed his numbers, we don't know what he has, and I'm sure at some point he will. I think you'll see that Poilievre has a big lead, a massive margin. It's going to be hard for anybody else to overcome. One of Charest or Brown's going to have to step back. I think that's pretty clear for anybody opposing Poilievre to have a chance. But right now, I would say that Poilievre could actually win this on the first ballot and still fight his way to a second ballot victory.
Yeah, I agree. Michael, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us again today.
You bet, Derek. Have a great day.
All right, take care. That's Michael Taube, columnist with Troy Media and Looney Politics, also former speechwriter for Stephen Harper. Lots coming up still here on The Rob Snow Show. I'm Derek Fage, and you're watching on Rogers TV and listening on City News.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Today is a very exciting day. We are officially opening the Interzip Rogers for the summer season of this year. Last year we were expecting to have maybe 20,000 people, and we actually had over 30,000 riders for the first year. So we're really excited to reopen this year.
That was epic and scary!
You have a really different perspective view-wise of the area we're in. So you have a clear view of the Parliament. Obviously you're crossing the river, and of course you're moving from a province to another, which is unique of this zip line. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Rogers has been partners even before Interzip opened, actually. They were all in the first meeting we had with Rogers, and that for us was really a nice commitment. We're really fortunate to have Rogers with us, and on top of having Rogers, it's basically the name of the zipline, which is the Interzip Rogers, that is now pretty much renowned across the country.
Rogers Interzip is a great activity for people who live in or visit the National Capital Region. Get out and have an opportunity to zip across the Ottawa River between Ottawa and Outaouais.
News in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, June 21st. Good morning, I'm Pirushka Gopal-Kista. Right now in both Ottawa and Smiths Falls, some light rain and 17 degrees. Here's what's making news this hour. Only 56% of Ottawa's population have rolled up their sleeves for the third dose of the COVID shot, and we need to do more. That's according to City Councillor Keith Eglai on the Rob Snow Show. He says while the city is doing a lot than it was during the last spike of the virus, there's still some room for improvement, especially as the fall months draw closer. Extra cash is needed for Stage 2 of the Ottawa Light Rail Transit Project. According to a report from the City of Ottawa's Finance and Economic Development Committee, they're asking Ottawa City Councillors to approve an additional $60 million. And taking a look at your traffic, today the 417 westbound between Anderson and Hunt Club, the left lane is closed there for construction until June 23rd. Highway 7 both ways between Dwyer Hill and Hazeldean, they're alternating lane reductions for maintenance until June 24th. And calling westbound from the 417 off-ramp to Kirkwood, there are also lane reductions for construction. Right now in both Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, some light rain and 17 degrees. I'm Perushka Gopal-Kister for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
He's the opinionated Ottawa icon.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV, filling in for Rob. The Ontario Medical Association, as you know, we've spoken to them before on the show. They have a plan to address the gaps in the healthcare system exposed by the pandemic and to improve access, equity, efficiency, and integration. They actually have what they call the Prescription for Ontario, Doctors' 5-point plan for better health care. It's a very detailed plan, and here to tell us more about that. And let's just be honest, this Friday, Premier Doug Ford, he's going to swear in a new health minister in Ontario, and we're going to look at what some of those priorities should be for the next 100 days of their mandate. Dr. Rose Zacharias, president of the Ontario Medical Association, joining us. Dr. Zacharias, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you. Let's go over that 5-point plan before we, get into, what your thoughts may be on what, you're expecting from Premier Doug Ford's government, because that 5-point plan is something that I think you'll be keeping a very close eye on, right?
Absolutely. So our 5-point plan is something we're calling the Prescription for Ontario, and it was really the result of the broadest consultation that the OMA has done in its 140-year history.
Okay.
So there we were, 2 years into the pandemic, talking to Ontarians and everyone who's invested in the healthcare system. Where are the gaps and what are the priorities and what should we do to fix and address them? So our 5-point plan outlines very clearly under 5 key priorities many recommendations of what we should be doing because we see and are experiencing the gaps for sure.
Well, yeah, let's look at each of those and maybe you can expand on each because, it's one thing to have a plan. It's another thing to come up with some solutions and perhaps you can share, maybe some of the solutions that could work on these plans, like reducing wait times. I mean, we've seen it, emergency room wait times, backlog of services as well has been a huge issue, including dealing with the doctor shortage and physician burnout. So let's tackle that first part, reducing wait times and the backlog of services. I think that naturally the doctor shortage and the physician burnout is a big part of the reason why we're seeing those long wait times, correct?
Well, you're right. I mean, we're not just seeing it, we're feeling it.
Right.
I think everyone in Ontario knows someone who is waiting for a hip surgery, a knee surgery, a cataract surgery, a hernia surgery, or maybe a cancer screening test. The mounting distress and stress and anxiety around wondering, okay, I'm overdue for my colonoscopy. I have a family history of cancer. I'm not getting in for this test. And so we know that there are actually 22 million backlogged patient care services that we're dealing with right now. 1 million of those are the surgeries that I've mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do talk about a solution there. We talk about thinking about how we deliver healthcare differently, how we do these lesser urgent, lesser acute, still important surgeries, taking them out of a hospital setting, putting them into something we're calling integrated ambulatory care centers, really these freestanding, publicly funded healthcare centers where people could come in, get their day surgery, and then recover at home afterwards. So that would be one solution to catching up on the backlog.
Are you encouraged at all that the Premier's office is listening to any of these recommendations?
We are encouraged,
Okay.
and we are willing to work with government. Ontario's doctors are nonpartisan, and so we are ready to get to work. We have the prescription for Ontario that outlines the recommendations, not just the backlog, but expanding mental health and addiction services in the community. We know that mental health is really under our strain, and so that's a key priority. Also improving and expanding home care and community care, strengthening public health and pandemic preparedness is another key priority in our prescription. And so we want to work with government. Right now, we are also excited about Friday's announcement. Who will be our next health minister? And how can we get leaders in the room, all the stakeholders in the room, and the physicians and the healthcare providers in the room to work on some of these solutions?
Well, and funding will be a big part of that. You mentioned mental health and addiction services when it comes to our overall healthcare system. When we look at the percentages of what we spend on our healthcare system and how much goes into mental health and addiction services, it's pretty disappointing for a country such as Canada. Would you not agree?
Well, we know we can do better, and we need to do better. We need to deliver the care that everyone in Ontario, not just in the urban centres, although there's shortages of doctors in every city, as well as rural and remote. We need to do better. So yes, we need to be strategic about how we spend the healthcare dollars. And for people to keep in mind, it costs $500 a day to keep someone in hospital and care for them there. For that same level of care to be delivered in a long-term care or community setting, it costs $150 a day, and even less for someone to receive care in their home, which can be done if we talk about integrated healthcare teams. And so we need to be strategic about how we spend the money. We're also calling on the federal government to increase their portion of our provincial healthcare spending. And so we want more money in the system. We want to spend it smartly and solve some of these problems.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up expanding home care. I think, with our aging population, we're seeing more and more people obviously wanting to stay at home longer. Do we have the proper training and proper resources to make sure that if we want to expand home care, that the people are ready and they've been properly trained and ready to go, or do we need to expand upon what we offer as far as training goes? Because I guess it is different type of training than we would see in a hospital setting, correct?
Well, we have a doctor shortage. We have healthcare team providers that are aptly trained actually to care for people in their homes, but they're experiencing burnout.
Right.
And so there has been announcements about new medical student spots being opened and junior trainees, more residency spots. But, that's a long-term solution. It takes 10 to 12 years before you graduate as a doctor. So to meet some of these, I know in Ottawa alone, there's 158 physicians needed right now, let alone dealing with early retirements and physicians who are just emotionally exhausted, who are looking to take time off, knowing to cover their practice. People are having 1.3 million people in Ontario don't have a family doctor right now. So we need more family doctors, and we need to support all the doctors and all the healthcare team providers inside the system so they can continue working at their best and provide the care that they want to do.
The pandemic isn't over. We've seen wastewater numbers have come up. We've seen a couple of outbreaks as well, not a couple, more than a couple. When it comes to pandemic preparedness, do you believe that we've learned enough lessons in what we've gone through that we can be prepared, whether this pandemic continues and we get other waves or a new pandemic comes our way? What is missing within the healthcare system?
So we've learned a great deal. We are not where we were in March 2020. Remember, the anxiety, the uncertainty, and for the first while, we weren't sure about the effectiveness of masks.
Yeah.
And we were without vaccines in those early days. I remember showing up in an emergency department shift and then coming home, getting undressed in my garage, and my 10-year-old son running down the stairs to hug me, and I turned him away. Don't touch me. I might give you the virus. I don't know if I've been exposed. We've learned a ton.
Yeah.
And so we need to apply that practical and strategic knowledge that we have now to prepare for, whatever is coming, whatever next public health crisis, however the waves, continue on, or to a lesser degree. We need to apply what we have learned. Ontarians paid a dear price. Lockdowns, isolation, our mental health, our employment, our economy, it all suffered. So we need to know better how to support the healthcare system that we hold dear, so that next time we face a crisis like this, we don't pay the same price.
I just want to let everybody know, if you're just joining us now, we're speaking to Dr. Rose Zacharias, president of the Ontario Medical Association. That led the last point, and I think technology is an important component to anything we do moving forward, especially in the healthcare field, and that's giving every patient sort of that team of healthcare providers, and just as importantly, linking them digitally. How far along are we from the local clinic to the hospital to your family doctor? Are we seeing an improvement in sharing patient information?
So I think we're seeing small improvements, but you're nailing it on the head as far as cause of burnout. Physicians will say that technology mires them down. For every 1 hour that a doctor spends with a patient, they spend 2 hours documenting that visit. We take a compassionate, skilled, person who sits in front of a patient to care for them, make recommendations and treatment recommendations, and we turn them in front of a computer screen to spend even up to 6 hours a day after a day of. Can you imagine if we could bring that physician away from their computer screen, how many more patients they could see, how much more quality time they could spend with their patient in the community or at a bedside? That's the type of caring that we
What's the solution there then? Is hiring people that could actually do that, input that information?
We need to get really creative and think outside the box. We talk about scribes that come alongside physicians and do the documenting for them. We have to upgrade our computer system so that they talk to each other, so we're not duplicating information. And you're right, at the end of the day, we need to let doctors be doctors. They were trained to care for patients. Caring for patients means, honestly, grabbing hold of hands and making eye contact and having those conversations when patients are in their most vulnerable moments, to have those conversations. And so we need to let doctors be doctors, equip them and empower them to do what they do best. I'm hopeful. I think our recommendations, if they're taken up, can actually make some good change.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from. I can say just from personal experience, Dr. Zacharias is going to see my family doctor, and I go in to see her, and in her office, just her office, like the entire office. I'm not just talking about hers, but the entire office itself. It looks like they're using Hyperions from, 35 years ago with the green screen. I'm not kidding. I know I'm laughing myself as well, but the upgrades that are necessary, I understand it costs a lot of money, but what is more important than our health?
So that technology is so important, right? We need to capture the data. We need to read the X-ray images and the CT scans and communicate with the pharmacy so that the prescription that's being written is absolutely accurate. But you know what it feels like when you talk about walking into your doctor's office and you've got, a medical issue, some pain, some undiagnosed suffering, that you're experiencing. You know what it feels like to sit across from that physician and really be listened to and heard and then spoken with and alongside, think, okay, I've got diabetes. It's currently out of control. I have high blood pressure. This could lead to a heart attack or a stroke if we don't get on top of it. Let's talk about what that means for you today. Do you need a new blood pressure medication? Do you need a referral to a cardiologist? Those conversations, in effect, they can often be healing in and of themselves.
I agree.
So like I said, doctors are equipped to do that. They're compassionate. They're resilient. They're hardworking. They're brilliant. We need to equip and empower them inside of a fractured system to do their really best work, and we'll feel it. It will feel different.
Absolutely.
When we set up healthcare team providers better than they are right now.
So well said. Dr. Zacharias, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate the time.
It's always a pleasure chatting.
All right. Take care. That's Dr. Rose Zacharias, president of the Ontario Medical Association. This is Derek Fage filling in for Rob Snow right here on City News.
we're encouraging people to rethink Dieppe, right? For the longest time in Canadian history, the Dieppe raid was seen as sort of a massacre, was seen as a failure of operation. You can imagine us, Canadian soldiers, going to Europe, and it's the first big mission that we're allowed to take the lead on, right? General Criard is there. We're getting ready. 6,000 troops are ready. They're ready to take the town of Dieppe and start the process of taking back Europe. But of course, as we know, it was a massacre. About 5,000 were either wounded, taken prisoner, or killed. And so it was considered a failure from the Allied perspective. But over the course of the last 80 years, and you can imagine as things get declassified, that we're starting to learn that it was not only just a raid, it was actually an intelligence gathering. And the Canadians were able to, with their sacrifice, sort of lead the way to what became D-Day. So that's what we're asking Canadians to look. We have a lot of family members who were either part of Dieppe, who part of D-Day, who went to Juno Beach, who really sort of were part of that World War II effort. Almost most Canadians do have family. So we're asking people to sort of think and rethink what Dieppe actually means. So we're inviting students, because it's very much a student-led initiative, because we've got our partners, No Stone Left Alone and the Juno Beach Center. But we're asking them to really rethink what Dieppe is and what it meant to World War II.
And you're asking them to write letters. You know, what an interesting perspective, especially from students. You know, do you wonder what their perspective might be compared to, how you've just described Dieppe and how that, that conversation has changed over the last 80 years?
I think that's what's going to be quite interesting. People from across the country and across the world, any expat Canadians can definitely join in. We've got 3 different places where you can send letters. On the East Coast, it's here in Ottawa, so at Beechwood. We've got our partners, No Stone Left Alone, out of Edmonton. And then the Juno Beach Center, they're celebrating Dieppe as well with a massive exhibition at the center in France. But we're encouraging, and all the information's on all 3 websites, so you don't need to look it up. But we're encouraging them just to write letters, and we're going to bring these letters to France, to the Dieppe Cemetery, as well as have a few of the remaining veterans receive these letters.
Yeah, and it goes beyond the soldiers themselves as well, right? Because the impact went beyond them. The impact went to their families, right? Their extended family. I mean, it's amazing how much of an impact it had, and I don't think we realize as a nation, that sort of trickle down effect, right?
I think we have those big Canadian moments, right? We've got Vimy Ridge in World War I. We've got Passchendaele. We've got Juno Beach. But Dieppe really was this sort of very important moment in World War II.
He's the opinionated Ottawa icon.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Well, welcome back to the show. I am not that Ottawa icon. Rob Snow is off today. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV, filling in for Rob. As I mentioned, great show. We kick off the show with City Councillor for Knoxdale-Marival Ward and Chair of the Ottawa Board of Health, Keith Egley. Keith, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Derek. You're that other Ottawa icon.
Thanks for saying so, Keith. Thanks for saying so. I appreciate that. Lots to talk about. I mean, the Board of Health has received the report on OPH pandemic spending. Let's talk first of all about the response, Keith, from, around the table with your colleagues, or even, listening to your constituents here in the region. What have you heard about the response in itself as far as the municipality goes?
Well, generally it's been quite positive. We actually had a preliminary report last night at the board meeting as well by an independent public health assessor as to how the response has gone thus far. We'll get a more detailed response in the fall, but the initial reaction was from this independent review that the public health and the city had been quite nimble in their approach and flexible in being able to get to the communities and the residents if they needed to. So generally speaking, the feedback both from residents that we're serving and an independent review has been that under the circumstances, and it was brand new for everybody, but that public health did quite well in meeting the needs of the community.
What about costs, Keith? When we look at the costs of the pandemic last year, how much did the pandemic cost?
Well, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but you can well imagine it was millions and millions of dollars. The good thing, though, that's happened with the previous provincial government and a very similar government just reelected is they have been very supportive on the cost front, basically saying to public health, when things got really difficult and a lot of resources had to be thrown at the COVID virus, keep track of what you're spending, let us know, we'll make you whole. We'll cover off those costs, and they've done that. On May the 2nd, they gave some one-time funding to cover the costs thus far this year, but they also made it clear that there'd be an opportunity later in the year to readjust those numbers. If because we just never really know what's going to happen with COVID. Right now, one of the other things we talked about last night, Derek, is that we are starting to see the wastewater numbers go up again. We're starting to see some more outbreaks. So again, we're looking like we're trending upwards, unfortunately, and so these are things that we're going to have to respond to, get more people vaccinated, make that available, and. But we've had a great provincial partner in that regard. They've been very supportive on the financial side of things, helping support any shortfalls that have come up, because as you can well imagine, with a moving target like this, it's difficult to get your budget bang on.
Right. We're speaking, by the way, to City Councillor Keith Eglai. Keith, obviously then ongoing funds are needed, right, for pandemic costs, because as you just said, when the wastewater numbers are going up, we have seen some outbreaks. Is that within the budget? And I know it's sort of, as you just described it, a moving target, but where's that money coming from? Have we set aside funds here in the city?
So again, we're working in partnership with the province. The province, as I said, gave what they called one-time funding, but at the same time saying in May that these numbers are subject to change. If you need to respond further and more aggressively to COVID in the community, we're there for you. And that's been our experience since the beginning of this, Derek, that when we got to the province and we said we needed to do these things because the province has been very supportive and very helpful in filling in those financial gaps for us. I have no reason to believe that's not going to be the case again.
Vaccination rates. We saw, excellent rates here in Ottawa. Do we have any idea of what sort of the fourth dose vaccination rate looks like at the moment, and who's eligible right now?
Yeah, so we need some work.
Okay.
In that, the first and second doses very high in the city, probably the high, close to, if not the highest, right across the province. So we really worked well in the city, and the residents stepped up and got the shots. But only 56% of our population right now has a third dose of the vaccine, and so we're in a much better place than we were. Last time we saw, surges happening, there are a lot of people vaccinated, but 56%, there's a lot of room for improvement there. So we're ready, willing, and able to provide vaccinations to those individuals. Our clinics are still open. Our neighborhood hubs are still open. And there's plenty of vaccine to go around. So now is a good time. And the other thing is that we don't want to lose sight of the fact that people are tired. They're very tired, Derek. They're tired of course, sort of curtailing their social activities and getting together with family members and just doing normal things. So, we realize that and we understand that. So the other thing is we're urging people, don't necessarily, lock yourself in your basement, but at the same time, address the risk factors around you.
Right.
How old are you? Who are you going to interact with? You're going to interact with seniors in your family, with young kids in your family. Are you immune compromised? You're going to be spending time with someone who is. Take all that into account before you decide, I want to go out to that restaurant, or I want to go to the movie theater, or get together with friends. work that into your assessments, your risk assessment as you go forward. And because we have seen there's definitely an impact of people sort of having to socially isolate, not be in contact with family and friends as often as they would like to, curtailing on the normal activities that they would do. And that's a health issue as well. So, our message is get vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, get that booster if you don't have it. And if you are going to go out, and it's important, we recognize that, to have those connections, very important, to assess the risk around you, the people around you, the activities you're going to partake in, and then make that decision.
Keith, just quickly want to touch on this motion from you that we saw on the council agenda considering a commemoration for the Eastway tank victims. Can you just expand on that for us?
Yeah, so I mean, I think everybody knows the story, what happened on that day. It was the most horrible industrial accident we've had in the city, I think, in 40 or 50 years. 6 people died. And it seemed important to me that we recognize that, we acknowledge that for the victims and their families. So I reached out to representatives from each of the victims' families, as well as spoke to the country, not Country Place, but the Maryville Gardens Community Association reps. And I said, this is the closest city park. It's a nice, quiet area. What does everybody think of planting some trees in memory of these individuals, putting a plaque in so people can remember what happened, and it's just a quiet place that family members and friends want to gather and remember the individuals. The families were supportive. The community of Maryville Gardens was supportive of that happening. So
not surprised,
I have no reason to believe that there won't be support tomorrow for it, and we can move forward. That probably in the fall, with tree planting in the fall, and putting a bench in for people to sit and think, contemplate about family.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV.